We are calling to order the 153rd meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission at the Boston Convention Center on Thursday, May 28th at about 10:30 a.m. First item is the minutes. Commissioner McHugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have two sets of minutes for consideration and approval today. Take them seriatim. The first is the May 6, 2015 minutes. They're in the book, and I would move that they be adopted as they are presented with the usual reservation of the power to correct mechanical and typographical errors.
Second. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
And the second set, Mr. Chairman, is from last week's meeting of 2 weeks ago's meeting of May 14. I'd make the same motion, that is to approve them in the form in which they appear in the packet with the usual reservation of rights for mechanical and typographical errors.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Well, I abstained from that because I wasn't here, so it's 4-0.
Actually, I'm sorry, and I abstained from the first set when I wasn't here.
Okay.
My apologies.
That's right. I should have pointed that out.
Yeah, sorry.
Anyway.
So there were 4-0 votes on both
Right,
sets.
on both sets.
Next up is administrative update, Executive Director Day.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission.
Morning.
Morning. Morning.
This morning we're going to start right off with a bang here, and today we've got WIN representatives are here with us, Bob Salvio, Chris Gordon, and then Steve Ratiska is also here from PMA. And if you take a look behind your tab 3A and B, they're here to talk to you and present their first quarterly report and their 6-month projection schedule. So I'll turn this over to WIN.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Great. Good morning, Commissioners. We're very pleased to be here this morning, and I'm not going to say much. I'm going to turn it over to Bob and Chris.
Great. Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Bob DeSalvio here with WIN today, and I'm joined by Chris Gordon. Thanks for the time so we can provide our update. We had produced a PowerPoint presentation, which we want to take you through now. It's the quarterly report as of March 31. And the first topic we want to talk about is permitting. So actually on page 4, we are currently in the process of working on our SSFEIR, and that's the second supplemental filing that we're doing. And the scope of that particular filing was limited to the items that you see here on the PowerPoint. The first was to give a full explanation of the MBTA land transfer, including all the issues surrounding our meetings with the MBTA, the land transaction itself, and ultimately the escrow arrangement. So that's item number 1. The second is to go through the impacts of the MBTA operations.
And the status, why don't you give us the status of each as you go through them?
Sure, and the status is that the escrow agreement was completed, and that process is over, so we'll just be reporting on that as part of the filing, but that's been complete.
Is the MBTA redoing the procurement while it's in escrow?
No.
It just goes in escrow?
It just goes in escrow. The money's been put in escrow, and so it awaits now the MIPA action.
Okay.
Well, doesn't there have to be, I don't want to belabor this, but
Sure.
Doesn't there have to be a workup of the MIPA environmental impacts of the transfer? Wasn't that the issue? Doesn't somebody have to be, whether it's you or the MBTA or both, working on an analysis of the environmental impacts of that transfer?
Yes, and that'll be part of the filing.
Okay, so it's not just a description of the escrow arrangement, it's a description of the environmental consequences of the transfer.
Yes, it's the entire transaction from start to finish.
All right.
The second item is the impacts of the MBTA operations and transit, and that is that by acquiring this parcel through the MBTA, we wanted to make sure that there were no impacts on their operation and they can perform the maintenance functions that they normally do in the Everett yard. And so there will be, in that filing, an analysis that shows that the MBTA operations remain whole and that they are able to do all of the work that they currently do to keep their services up and running.
Okay.
And the Orange Line subsidy?
The Orange Line subsidy, we've now met 3 times with the DOT with proposals going back and forth. There's another piece of information that we are waiting from the MBTA, and then we'll get that to a conclusion, obviously, before the filing. So it's been very productive meetings with the T on that arrangement. So right now, we just have a small number of open items, and then we'll resolve that, and we'll report on that in the filing.
Small number of open items, including the subsidy.
Including the dollar amount of the subsidy itself, yes.
Right.
Okay.
But there's some different calculations, quite honestly. They're looking at that very carefully. This is a unique sort of process for them, and it's something that probably has some implications well past our project. So I think they're being very thoughtful about this, and so we've had some very, very good exchanges back and forth. It's not just a number. It's in reality, there's some conceptual ideas
Some
behind that.
methodology. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And they've been doing a great job with that.
Okay.
The next is the mitigation and Section 61 findings. So anytime that you redo one of these statements, we would have to go through and update any of the Section 61 findings. That's normally a requirement of any of these filings. And correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, we'll be actually putting in the document the entire Section 61 filings will be included in this next filing.
Including any updates.
And including any updates. The next item is traffic and transportation. This particular section is limited to establishing a process for integrating the City of Boston's long-term plans for Sullivan Square and Rutherford Avenue and the impacts of casino-related traffic and additional information and clarification of the modeling development to address any concerns by municipalities. And that when we say municipalities in plural, there was a number of comment letters that we received as part of the process asking about certain technicalities. And so as part of the normal response to comments, we will be addressing all of those in the next filing. And some of those came in from other surrounding communities. And as far as the process with the City of Boston, again, we've been talking to the DOT, and Secretary Pollack has called a meeting to get the interested stakeholders together and to discuss a process for moving forward to talk about this integration of our plan with the long-term solution for Sullivan Square. So that process is just beginning. But notifications have gone out for the first meeting on that topic. And then, of course, the last of the 5 items is the response to comments, as you do with any other of these filings. Anytime a letter is submitted, we go through and we do a detailed response so that we can make sure that any interested stakeholder gets an answer to their question. So we're in the process of doing that. I'm hesitant to give you a firm date of the filing because there are a few open items. So I'd rather not peg a date. We've said we're going to file it this summer, but that gives us sort of a 3-month window. I would hope that it would be at the front end of that as opposed to the back end of that, but there are a couple open items that we need to resolve before we get the filing in. We want it to go in complete and as accurate as possible. So we'll wait until it's ready and then submit it.
Questions?
To the extent you can speak to this, Mr. DeSalvio, the process relative to the long-term planning on Sullivan Square, you also mentioned a first meeting, perhaps facilitated by Secretary Pollack. Do you have a date for that yet, or would you characterize that to be the first part of that,
Yes,
establishing that process?
We do have a date. It's this coming Monday,
Okay.
June 1st.
Okay.
And so we're going to really take the lead of the Department of Transportation and want to hear how they're thinking about a process, and we'll learn more about that on Monday.
Okay.
What's your understanding of what the Secretary was looking for when they made that requirement for the process?
From what we understand, the issue of Sullivan Square is not only a Boston issue, but it has regional implications with all the surrounding communities, whether it's Everett or Somerville. And it's an important transportation hub for the region, including T-Stop that's there. And so I think the idea was to get all of the stakeholders that would be critical to the thought process on it in a room, and maybe get some combined wisdom from the group. And again, we'll wait and see what kind of thoughts the DOT has on that. But I think that was it. It was to take a bit of a regional approach because that particular area is so critical for transportation.
Anything else?
Mr. DeSalvio, is a firm consensus necessary to move forward on that issue?
I don't know if I can answer that question yet. I think it's important to get the stakeholders in a room.
So after
And
Monday, you'll have a better idea?
I think so, in fairness.
Okay.
Bob, just one quick question. The fifth one, in terms of responding to comments contained within, responding to comments that were submitted as part of the MEPA process. When I first read that, that kind of came across as everybody's required to do it. It's not necessarily a special consideration for this one application, but I also read it to kind of suggest that maybe the responses to comments wasn't something that you were doing all along through the most recent round of the EIR filing. Am I characterizing it wrong, or is there something I'm missing in this part?
As you know, you have to do response to comments at each step in the way. We've done the
Right.
EENF, the DEIR, the EIR, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
We've done response to comments at each stage. We did see this as routine.
Okay.
There was some language in there about formatting of how the response to comments for easier sorting and that sort of stuff, but we've talked to MEPA, I think, 3 times now about how to actually do this, and we think we're in sync with them on how to do it. So we will be responding to every comment that came in from anybody, and the comments will be, thorough and answering the question.
Okay.
So we didn't see anything, maybe we didn't see anything unusual in the request.
Okay.
And I do think, though, one other comment on that is that in each round, there may or may not be some new commenters. There might have been some that might have been unique at each round, and so we have to obviously stay up to date and be most current with the responses.
Okay.
Great.
Great. On now page 5, under permitting, our site plan review application, that's for the actual site plan of the casino project itself. It was submitted to the city of Everett on May 11th, and right now there's a proposed hearing date of June 22nd, 2015 for our site plan review in the city of Everett. We also notice of intent, and that's to the Everett Conservation Commission. In early June, we'll be submitting that notice of intent to the Everett Conservation Commission, and again, that's for the main project work. And of course, Chapter 91, it's sequential, obviously with the environmental certificate. So at the conclusion and after we would potentially receive an environmental certificate, we would then be prepared to file our Chapter 91 application. We've actually got the work on that for the most part done, and we're just waiting till we get a final MEPA sign-off and get a certificate, and then we'll be submitting that right behind that.
You keep referring to page numbers, Mr. DeSalvio.
I'm
What-
sorry?
What page numbers?
We don't have the, it's this, it's.
Oh, I'm sorry, is this not in
Page
your
number
book?
on
No,
the
it's
slide?
not in the
It's
book.
not in the
Oh, I'm
book.
so sorry. Yes, so it's the page
Pages on that.
on
All right,
the,
okay.
And it's on the screen, too.
No, I understand. I
Okay.
just thought,
Yeah.
I didn't see page.
Okay.
Forget it. I understand.
Got it.
okay, and now I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk a little bit about the site remediation.
Thanks, Bob.
Well, are you finished the permitting issues?
Yes.
On the document I do have, there is, which is a document at tab 2B, 2B?
Yeah.
Of our document.
3B.
Yeah, 3B. It's the Wynn Resort and Everett quarterly report to us. At page 4, it says that on a separate track, Howard Stein Hudson, Wynn's design team for the Sullivan Square improvements, has been working since last year on the conceptual designs for the improvements and has filed an application with the City of Boston's PIC to advance the design, and that's reiterated on page 5 of Appendix 3. Could you just tell me about that, because that was a condition of the license, that be done within 90 days. So could
Sure.
you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. We submitted our application to the Public Improvement Commission on January 30th, 2015. Copy of our submission was previously provided to the Commission, and it includes the following: an engineering report, a coordination plan in 11 by 17, a coordination plan with pavement markings in 11 by 17, a coordination plan in 24 by 36, a coordination plan with pavement markings in 24 by 36. Our engineering consultant, who prepares these applications on a regular basis, prepared our application following consultation with the Public Improvement Commission. A copy of our application was also submitted to 13 agencies. While there's no formal application, our application follows the process prescribed by the Public Improvement Commission. We've not received any indication from the Public Improvement Commission or any other agency that our application is deficient in any way. And so I want to make sure that we got on the record what we have done so far, and it's a good question about the PIC.
Right. Well, I would like you to follow up with staff with respect to what's happened since that occurred, and I would like to understand where we are on that. The 90-day requirement was a requirement, as you know, and we discussed it at the license hearing. A requirement designed to get that piece of it moving forward, and a concrete proposal on the table, and an indication that the other requirements for getting those permits were moving forward. So I'd like to have staff follow up with you to see where we are on that, and then either have staff or you come back at a future meeting and perhaps tell us further what's going on and what's materialized and what the anticipated next steps are, and with some timelines.
Great, we'll be happy to do that.
Just also while you're on permitting, just for anybody who's interested in doing development work in Massachusetts, I would draw anybody's attention to tab 3C, which has a 7-page list of all of the permits, individual permits required by WIN. 33, I think, if I counted accurately. But it's a staggering proposition, and you hear about it all the time. We hear people talk about permitting in Massachusetts, but it's interesting to look at that 7-page list, just for the record.
Very comprehensive.
Well, and what we're gonna do later in the schedule section is try to make it in a little bit of plain English, because it's spaghetti soup after a while, so we're gonna try and explain sort of how it flows, and it does make sense, but it's a complicated path.
Right.
Great.
All set to move on?
Yep.
We want to give you an update on remediation. It's no secret the site is historically an industrial site, and it's quite contaminated, so we want to make sure we get ahead of the remediation. So we've been busy at work since we received our license, doing a lot of work. We've got nearly 2,000 borings are done. All the on-site investigation is finished. All the water site investigation is finished. The actual last lab reports came back this week for the water side work, so we think we now know about as much as we can about the site, and we've got plenty of information on that. What happens is after you do that investigation, you file your reports with the DEP. The remedial action measures plan has been provided to the DEP for phase 1, which is the most robust part of the remediation. That's actually removing the hot spots, we call them. If you remember from our earlier briefings, even though the whole site is not clean, there are 3 areas that are particularly bad that we're going to remove. 2 we're going to remove, and 1 we're going to treat in site before we start construction. So that's what we're focused on now. We filed our remedial action measure for those. We also received a petition, which is called a public involvement petition. That means the public would like to know more about the remediation, which we think is a good thing. So we're working on that process now, and I'll talk to you about how that works. And in parallel with that, we're actually developing the plans and specifications so we can bid this work out and get a contractor to do this first phase of remediation, hopefully this year. So
Can these RAM phases take place prior to MEPA?
we're still working through that process with both MEPR and DEP. So there's a sequence. You mentioned the 33 permits. There's a sequence they all have to go in, and we're still working with them on exactly how that sequencing works, but we're assuming we can do all this work this year.
But you don't know whether it has to be before or after the MEPA approval?
Correct.
Do not know
We
yet.
haven't got the final clarification specifically on the DEP piece, which sequence the permit's going.
Okay.
The public involvement process, again, we think this is a good thing. What this requires us to provide all this information in a public repository. So what we're doing is we're putting all of our environmental documents, primarily the RAM plan and the PIP plan, in 2 libraries in Everett, and we're also putting them online at our website. We're hosting a public meeting next Tuesday night, June 2nd, which will be in Everett, in City Hall. We'll brief anybody who shows up. That'll actually be, all the remediation will be described to them. We've also been interviewing everybody who signed the petition so that we know what their thoughts were when they filed the petition. And then after June 2nd, there's a 20-day comment period where they can give us advice on what they think of both the involvement plan and the remediation plan. So after that 20 days, we'll obviously take the comments seriously. We'll make any modifications that make sense to the 2 plans, and then we'll be able to proceed from there. So that's the process underway now, and we'd encourage anybody to participate in that wants to know more about the remediation. And we'll do that at future steps too. At each step in the way, we'll be having a similar hearing, if you will, on the remediation process.
That, excuse me,
yeah.
that might be something, Elaine, that we would want to shoot out to our people too, about the opportunity to be involved in that.
Sure.
Great.
And again, it's also virtually online too, so all the documents will be also at our website. We've actually added a link on the website where you can go and review all the documents. So everything anybody could want is out there if they want to review any of the stuff we have. We're also, as I mentioned, putting together a detailed set of plans and specifications for contractors. A lot of questions come up about where's the material going, where are the trucks going to go, so we're working through all that in the plans and specifications that we're doing. We are going to be prescribing truck routes. We are going to be dealing with all of the disposal options, so that will all be clarified. We'll put it out for contractors. They'll obviously bid on it, and we'll select the best value and make sure we get a good, very highly qualified contractor on board to do that work. On the design process, we have a very large design team that's all over the world working on the design. It's led by a group in Las Vegas, Wind Design and Development, which has the lead architect, Ryder Butler, who's really driving the design from that end of it. Locally, we have Jacobs here in Boston, who is the local architect who's doing all the construction drawings, all the detailed design. And then we have a series of sub-consultants around the world that are doing different pieces of the design. They're making tremendous progress. If you think of the building, it's divided into several different quadrants. We have the hotel tower, which has its own team designing the hotel tower. We have the foundation where the parking garage is, which is a large piece of the work. It's about a quarter of the work. Then we have what we call the podium, which is the most detailed part of the building. That's where the gaming is, the restaurants, the back of house, the delivery, all that sort of stuff. And then we have all the site work. So those 4 teams are working aggressively as we speak. The tower is the furthest along. They're actually into very, very specific details on the hotel rooms, the hallways, the sport functions, so we're far into that design. The foundation is coming along very well as well, understanding how that's going to work in the soil. It's working fine. The site work is quite far along because we had to file that with the City of Everett for our site plan review. And now most of the effort is on the podium. That's where the real details of how the whole first floor facility is going to work. It's on schedule. It's on track. Many issues, as you can imagine, but they're all going in the right direction. We also met with your consultants, including PMA, a week ago. They've asked for a detailed design briefing. We're going to do that. So we're going to bring our design team in and walk them through as much detail as they want on all the 4 different quadrants of the design process.
So this is basically taking the conceptual materials, the renderings and the other kinds of plans that we had at the license award stage, with the exception of the reformatted skin, and drilling down and now beginning to put together the actual construction diagrams, plans, and drawings that are necessary to build what was presented to us in conceptual form during the licensing process. Is that a fair
And
statement?
it takes 2, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it takes 2 paths, if you will, in parallel. One is sort of the design concepts, and that's from Steve Wynn on down, including Bob, that's spending a lot of time on the operational impacts, the aesthetic impacts, and sort of how the design is going to present itself. The other part is the technical side. We've done a lot of geotechnical work, we've done a lot of mechanical analysis, we've got a utility analysis team, we've got a lot of sustainability issues, environmental issues, that sort of stuff. So those teams are working in parallel, so when the design comes together in those final documents, it clearly represents the design intent, but it also works very well from a technical point of view.
All right.
We've also worked out a schedule with the City of Everett of how we're going to submit these for their review. This is a big review for the City of Everett, so we're working with them. They're actually hiring additional consultants that are going to review this so that they can keep up and we can keep up. So we're laying out a schedule with them of how these are going to be submitted to them and how they're going to review them for building permit purposes. And that's going very well. Other questions on the design?
Sorry, go ahead.
You've reported in the past about the critical path. Just remind me that I'm having two paths on the whole schedule. Remind me those elements and how they work with
Yep.
the design status that you
Well,
have?
about the first third of the schedule, the critical path is through permitting. And of those 30-some-odd permits that the chairman mentioned, it really goes through MIPA and then Chapter 91. That's what drives the critical path. It's not the remediation, it's not some of the local permitting, it's really MIPA through Chapter 91. And that's what we're working really hard on to make sure we compress that. Once we get through those processes, then it becomes more of a physical critical path to construction. Again, the remediation will not be on the critical path because that'll be done early. It then becomes the foundation. You've got to get down to the bottom of the hole, put the caissons in, and work back up through the tower. So right now, the tower is really the critical path, and it's a very close second is the back of house, because we like to get the power plant and all the temperature control equipment online about a year before we open, so that the building is under climate control long before it opens, so all the materials are fine, the gaming, everything is fine. So the critical path goes up through the tower, but very close behind it is the back of house, the heating plant, so that's got to be tracked very closely. We're estimating, and you'll see it in our schedule, it's roughly about 30 months from when we break ground, which is quick, but it can be done for sure. So that's the sequence we're after.
And is the trigger for break ground the MIPA certificate?
No,
Is
it's
that-
after
is
that, Chapter 91.
Chapter
You
91,
can't
right.
file, the way I mentioned the sequencing of all
Yeah,
those permits,
right, sorry.
you can't file your Chapter 91 permit until you get your MIPA certificate. We've drafted the document, it's ready to go, and we'll have it on their desk the day we get our MIPA certificate, but then there's a 6 to 9 month process to get through that.
Okay.
Once we get through that, then we can start actually on the construction.
Right, okay.
And I should say that, as you know, in any of these big projects, even though that's the critical path, we consider everything on the critical path, so it's not like we're not pushing all the other sides of this as well.
Anybody else? In your test borings or any of your other preliminary work, have you come across any surprises? I mean, there's usually something.
Yeah, no, I would say no. I mean, this will be way more detail than you want to know, but for example, there's a fair amount of decomposed peat moss down there, the organics that were left over from what used to be part of the harbor, so there's organics to deal with. There's the contaminants we knew about, there's the tunnel muck. Also, there's a fairly steep drop-off in the ledge under the site. No surprises, but good information to have. So with 1,776 borings, if there's a map we could provide you, we've bored everywhere. So we know exactly where the bedrock is, we know exactly where the organics are, we know exactly where the clay layer is. So I would say, to answer your question, no surprises, but an awful lot of information, which is helpful.
Great.
Just to summarize, to make sure I understood this correctly, with the exception of the site remediation, the physical, site remediation that you've been talking about, the combined MIPA finish process and then Chapter 91 process is projected to run about 12 months. Is that fair?
We think it's a little less than that because we're on the optimistic side of the
Right,
91, but that's
right.
sort of 6 to 9 months. We like to think it's 6, but it's a next spring.
Yeah.
It's a next spring timeframe. Now,
So it's-
there is some things.
And the consequence of that is that apart from site remediation, which it has to be done, the construction really is likely to begin next spring sometime.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that's outside Chapter 91, and we're evaluating what of that we would do ahead of time. It's not critical path work, but it's good to get done. For example, there's a lot of utility work we can do. We're working with National Grid on relocating utilities. There's the service road, and in a minute, I'm gonna talk about all the off-site infrastructure. So there's plenty to do, but you're correct. The critical path that runs through that goes through MIPA, Chapter 91, and then the tower.
Yeah.
So even though there's a lot of work we will be doing in the next 12 months, it will be in that sequence.
Okay.
And the utility work's a good example. We've been meeting regularly with National Grid every couple of weeks, and they have a lot of work to do to provide, obviously, the utilities, as you've seen in our filings. And they're raring to go. That's all going very well, but they'll be doing some of their work ahead of time as well. It's way outside Chapter 91.
Chris, I got a quick question, looking at the document, excuse me, that was in our packet, talking about one of the permits, Chapter 91 Waterways License, and in the next column, you have some of the dates. It says Project August 2015, Remediation September 2015. Help me understand project
Could you
date
repeat the
and
first part of that? The
remediation date. This was Mass DEP license, Chapter 91 Waterways License. I'm just trying to understand in the, kind of the date column that you provided us, project August 2015, remediation September 2015. Just tell me what project date
Yeah, now there's several
remediation
different
date is.
Chapter 91 permits, so if you don't mind, if you could just refer to what, I don't want to make sure I answered.
It's
Is it
at
in
the
the-
bottom of page 3. It really, my question isn't really about the
Not that
license
page.
itself.
No,
Okay.
he doesn't know what you're looking at. He's got the slides that we don't.
Sorry.
Of the schedule, of the quarterly report.
Yeah.
Okay. We got two different page 3.
Yeah.
Again, it's not about the the license itself. It's more, help me understand, just project date, remediation date.
Well, I'd have to see it because project is throughout the filing. In other words, there's a little bit of jargon here that I need to explain. We have a series of Chapter 91 permits, a series of NOIs to get,
Right.
and some of them are for the main project, which we usually call project, and then there's off-site work, there's some of the harbor work, there's some of the gateway work, other stuff. So what it may mean, and I'll try to find it here, but
Sure.
it probably means the main project permitting, which means the actual resort itself, versus some of the off-site work. There's also several different phases of remediation in the schedule. One is these 3 hotspots, which is phase 1. Then you've also got, next year, we'll be doing the work in the river. That'll be
Right.
a different phase.
Right.
And we also have a RAM plan for the actual foundation construction, which isn't, it's not technically remediation, but we're treating it as such because some of the soils are contaminated. So I don't know exactly what you've got in front of you, but that's probably what it is.
I think that's it. So there's more than 35 permits because they all have different phases, or some of them.
It's just, you explained it. Project refers to the main body, and that's one category of work. And remediation refers to a separate set of work.
Oh, I know what this is. This is, these are 2 different Chapter 91 licenses. One for the main project, and this is confusing. Where it says project August 15, that's our expectation of filing the main project Chapter 91 application.
Okay.
And then remediation, roughly in September, we would file the next application, which is totally separate. That's the remediation out in the river. The reason we're doing them separately is one is way ahead of the other, so we didn't want to wait, and we don't need them to be filed at the same time.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Off-site infrastructure, as you know, we have a very strong program for doing a lot of off-site infrastructure work, places like Broadway, Sweetser, Santilli, Sullivan, Wellington, Revere Beach Parkway, 2 T stations. So there's a lot of work to be done off-site, and we want to make sure we get ahead of that. The process we're on right now is in parallel with our final MEPA filing. We're about to put out an RFP for a design firm to design this work. We need to make sure we get a qualified engineering firm that knows how to do highway work in Massachusetts. That RFP is going to go out. They'll be selected hopefully by the end of the summer. We'll then have somebody on board to do that. We'll be designing and permitting through the end of 15 and into the first half of 16. We'd like to break ground on some of that work later in 16 and build it through 16 and into 17, so it's done roughly by the end of 17 and certainly done before we open. So we don't see any big issues there, but of course you want to get ahead of it because some of these are, even though they're not big dollar values, they're complicated little projects, so, and there's a whole bunch of them. So this team would be managing all that, designing all that, permitting all that, and then we would put it out for competitive bids to build all that. It also mentions a key parcel here, just to remind you, the service road that goes around the back goes through the what's known as the warehouse site. Since we met you last, we actually do own that now. We've taken full possession of that, so that's not any obstacle. Project schedule, I wasn't gonna go line by line through this, but I'm happy to. I was gonna instead sort of give you the general theme so you understand what we're doing. This is a 6-month schedule. Even this 6 or 7 pages is consolidated. The schedule would fill your inbox, but there's a lot of moving parts, as you know, to something like this. So the first one we've talked generally about, but just to remind you where we are on the permitting front, there's a lot of work right now in the regulatory side, which we think is going quite well. The SSFEIR is the big one, Chapter 91, Notice of Intent, City Site Plan Approval. Those are the big ones we're working on. We're also starting to talk to the city about things like building permits and that sort of stuff. Again, no surprises there, but there's a lot of activities you'll see in the schedule for all the regulatory work that we're doing over the next 6 months. There's then a big section here for design, and it roughly follows the 4 parts of the project I talked about, the tower being furthest ahead and et cetera from there. So there's a lot of design work going on. There's daily, video conferences. There's daily work going on. The team is doing a ton of work to try to make sure this is coming together, and we're extremely pleased where the design's going. We're also in the process of updating cost estimates, updating all that sort of stuff to make sure we're where we need to be in that sense. Jumping ahead, we talked about off-site infrastructure. Again, we'd like to get that team on board this summer and get them started, so we'll be able to meet all those deadlines. Remediation, we talked about that. We want to get that going this year as well, and it certainly looks like we can. Site utilities, the National Grid is the biggest. We have to deal with a lot of utilities, but they're the biggest one because they have both gas and power for this site. So they've got some infrastructure work to do, so we're meeting with them, including a long meeting yesterday, about how that all works, and we're pleased at how that's going. They've got to build power lines, gas lines, that sort of stuff, and they're ready to go, and we don't see any issues with that. And then we've got a bar here for construction. The only near-term construction, this is little stuff, but we are going to be fencing the site, cleaning the site up, putting a sign on the site, getting rid of some of the debris that's out there and making it look like making it look like a real site. So some of that will go on this summer. We'll be fencing the warehouse site we talked about. But as the chairman mentioned, the heavy construction is really in the spring. That's the end of my section. Happy to answer any questions before Bob goes into some of the workforce issues.
No, it's very exciting. It's a lot of stuff.
That there is.
Okay.
Other comments or questions?
No, I think it's a very thorough plan, and it seems to be moving forward. There are a lot of moving pieces, and of course, the MIPA piece and the permitting pieces are up front and are critically important for this to move forward. So I know you're concentrating on those and working with all the stakeholders to try and ensure that those are secured secured as quickly as possible.
Great. Next, I wanted to update you on project resources and diversity. As I know the commission knows, we're represented on the Access and Opportunities Committee by Jenny Peterson. Our development manager is here today. She's been doing very good work in making sure that we can get ourselves known out there to both folks that are interested in having gainful employment with the resort once it's open, or get involved with the construction process, and also trying to pair up folks that want to work on either the design or construction through, for example, Jacobs is a good example, who's our local executive architect, and we're trying to pair up some companies through Jacobs so that we can provide some opportunities to some of the smaller firms who are looking to get involved with our project. Of course, we'll be doing that when the GC is selected ultimately for the job as well. But we've been very actively engaged in trying to make sure that we can bring as much inclusion to the project as possible. And we will be providing regular monthly updates through the Access and Opportunities Committee. As far as workforce goes, we've established our goals through a prior process with the commission. We're including those goals in all of our RFPs so people know exactly up front kind of what we're looking for along the way. Of course, when contract work does begin on site, those contractors, as you know from Penn's project and from MGM, they'll be required to have weekly diversity reports, and then their monthly women, minorities, and veterans subcontractor reports that we'll be filing on a regular basis once the main construction does begin. So we're getting geared up and ready for that process in advance of construction starting.
There is a status report on that. I guess that's in the second half of your presentation, right? Are you going to talk about?
It's in the quarterly report. Yeah,
So you're going to come back to that at that point?
we can actually.
Well, I just was curious. It had women, minority, and small business. You just now referred to women, minority, and veterans.
Right.
But veterans doesn't show up on the quarterly status report. Only small business does. I didn't know whether that was a typo or whether.
Probably, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think we've had any engaged yet. And certainly they will be added to the report as we engage them. I can tell you that as of currently, let me jump to that.
I saw it. I saw the numbers, and you can get to that when you get to it, Bob. But
Okay.
Is there a small business requirement too?
No, it's.
Jenny's.
Or go ahead, if you want to add anything, Jenny.
Veteran business enterprises, I think it's, that maybe typo on there, it should be women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses.
Okay.
and minority-owned.
I wondered if that was the case. Okay. It's okay. The third category is.
This one says, mine says contracts, and are we talking about contracts now?
Appendix 5.
Contracts, payments to minority, women, and veteran business enterprises for the design phase. This is on Appendix 5 to the quarterly report. Our own report talks about small businesses. But Appendix 5
Yes,
to
our.
the quarterly reports talks about minority, women, and veterans business enterprises.
Correct.
And
So, sorry.
And that's how our goals are presented
Right.
in those three
Right.
categories. And I might as well just get to this while we're talking about it right now. Through March 31st, we've had 2 minority businesses sign up as part of the design process with a decent-sized contract value. And then 1 women-owned business, no veterans yet. But again, we've made at least a start on this process, and one of them is fairly significant dollar amount. It would represent about 2.6% of our 7.9% goal. So that was a fairly decent contract that was already awarded.
You know, I apologize, Bob. I was looking, as Jim just pointed, I was looking at the wrong thing. So
Okay.
I just scratched that whole
No problem.
paragraph. All right.
No problem, but just, so we've obviously kicked off the process, and we're obviously gonna be trying to add more, as we're at the very front end of this, so we'll be adding more as time goes on.
Right.
But I think we're off to a pretty good start.
No, it is, I agree, it's off to a good start, and we, of course, have the Penn model behind us, and this is, but they couldn't start really fresh. You can, and you're obviously focused on it, so
Yes.
I think this will look forward to continued progress in this area.
Great.
And I've said this to you privately, but I'll say it in public. Jenny gets high marks for her participation in this and the seriousness with which she's representing your commitment to this, and we appreciate that.
And we'll continue that, and thanks, Jenny. The next item I wanted to talk about was involving the workforce side of the equation. Of course, right now, the main focus is on construction jobs, and we've been working very aggressively with Brian Doherty and the rest of the folks at the building trades to try to make sure that we can get a lot of new faces into their industry. There's so much construction that's going on in the greater Boston area, and of course our project will be one of the major ones, and they're also looking to add to their ranks, and they're looking to diversify their ranks. And so we had an event just recently which was by all accounts a smash success. It was on May 9th. It was at Everett High School, and we ran it from 9 a.m. to noon. We had and in a little bit I'm gonna actually ask if you wouldn't mind, we were gonna show a video, because no matter how I could describe it, I don't think I could describe it appropriately. There was probably 100 people waiting when we opened up, and we logged in 800 names, but the estimate was probably closer to 1,000 people that went through there. And it was a really interesting group, younger folks, a very diverse group, a lot of people that did some prep work on how to prepare to go to something like this. They were even asking us questions while they were waiting online about how to make sure they could present themselves in a good way to some of the trades. It was very encouraging to see that much participation. We had a lot of outreach beforehand. We used Career Builder. We went to the local Hispanic and Latino media. We were on Urban Update. We had some cable access shows that were really widely watched. We got a lot of good feedback on it. I think it showed in the results that if you put the effort behind it, you can attract some new folks, and I think the trades were very happy to see that. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll stop talking. We have a short video. Will you be able to see it on your monitor down front? Okay, or on, go ahead. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Has everyone had a chance to sign in? Please, sign in, that way you won't have to stand in line going in.
All right, hi, I'm Liz Skidmore. I have been a carpenter for 25 years, and I really want to encourage women to consider coming into the union building trades.
Women being head of households, we need to take charge and make real money, good money that can put your kids through college, maybe buy your first home, pay all your medical bills. It's really a great opportunity. Come on down. that, it's not just for women, it's New England Regional Council of Carpenters, so everybody.
Carpenters, and we're doing outreach if you know any women who might be interested in the carpenter.
Right.
Another day. So, 10 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever it is, I'll be in the next room and we'll get this show on the road. All right, folks? Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's great.
Isn't that great to see? And I really want to thank the building trades. As you saw as part of the video, that was Brian Doherty actually greeting with myself. He was greeting the folks as they were coming in, and we tried to make it really a personal approach to it. And we got a lot of support from the trades, and we'll continue to do events like this as time goes on. But it's important for them because you can't just show up, want to get involved with the trades and go right to work. There's a whole procedure that you have to go through in terms of signing up, going through their program. So they need to do that now for our building process as it moves forward over the next couple of years. But I thought we're off to a very good start. And that really concludes our formal remarks, and we're open for any questions that you might have.
Is there a way, Bob, to track how many of those 800 to 1,000 people end up in the pipeline?
We have we have about 800 names of folks that actually logged in, so we're currently putting them in our database. So we'll be able to take a look at that. Ultimately, we could wind up asking the building trades to ultimately see how many conversions maybe they got out of that, something if they were willing to share that information. But certainly we tracked all their names for the folks that want to keep in touch with us. We have a talent network that we go back out to regularly for any information on jobs.
This is, as you know, an absolutely central part of the access and opportunity strategy. As you say, you can't just say, okay, send me some women or send me some minorities, you need them in the pipeline. In your case, we've got a time in the pipeline. So it would probably take a little work, but finding out how many do translate actually into participation would be tremendously meaningful, you know.
I don't know exactly how we do that, but
Yeah.
we'll certainly look into it, and if there's a way to do it, we'll certainly do it.
Yeah. I mean, Jenny, that could be something I think the Access and Opportunity Committee might want to ask of the unions to do
It
that.
also lets us test the effectiveness of some of these events we're hosting.
Right,
Where do you get the biggest catch?
Right.
And not only ask, but contribute. The Access and Opportunity Committee can also contribute in the effort to get people into the pipeline.
Well, I'm sure they're doing, yeah, right.
You know, with ideas, with outreach, with, you know, incentivizing people to sign up to their apprenticeship programs, explaining what that is all about. It's not very, it's not immediate. You know, they have to sign up, understand, you know, where they are, etc. So they could also be a big help.
And I know this followed up on some similar meetings that the mayor had organized, I think in partnership with you guys over the previous month.
Yes.
Targeting high school students, and you know, it seemed, this event looked successful, obviously, but the mayor's efforts also, I know, sparked some interest from the mayor of Springfield to think about doing the same thing as the MGM project kind of moves ahead. So
great.
But it will be interesting. I'm sure the unions will be certainly interested to see where they're getting the bang for their buck in terms of time spending and recruiting, and seeing if some of these people actually enter the apprentice programs or the training programs as they have them laid out.
That's right. We also got a fair number of people who showed up wanting to talk about permanent jobs. So we were able to give them information as well. That wasn't the intent of the function, but it worked fine. So we were able to talk to them about, they were interested in, you know, all kinds of jobs inside the facility.
They came loaded with resumes and figured they'd take a shot that some of us might be there, and I applaud the effort. So that's great. Great to see that many folks interested.
And some of it, just so I'm clear, some of the construction RFPs, some of the early work, all those RFP opportunities are posted on your website, inviting anybody to go and check those out and see what the specs are.
On some of the RFPs, it isn't just anybody. For example, remediation, we're going to have a very specialized list of contractors qualified to do it. So the information will be available, but the bid list won't be anybody in the world. It'll be you know, contractors that we feel are qualified to do things like remediation.
Absolutely.
And let me just clarify, what will be posted on the website is part of the public involvement plan that Chris was talking about. all the documents related to the remediation aspect. We're going to go up next week. As soon as we finish all those documents, they'll be posted probably by Tuesday.
Before the hearing Tuesday night.
Before the hearing Tuesday night, we'll put the first set up and then all the responses to that.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for the time this morning.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you're ready, yeah. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back in 5 minutes. I think we are ready to reconvene the 153rd meeting of the Gaming Commission. It's about 11:30. And we are to item 3C, I believe.
Mr. Chairman, we are. The third quarter budget report and the diversity update. With us, we have Derek Lennon, our CFAO, and his team. So I'm just going to move it over to Derek. And by the way, the items are in under tab C and D. There's a series of reports that begins with a memorandum from Derek. Derek.
Thank you, Director Day. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be joined by Agnes Bollier, Troop DeBanda, and Dean Ventola this morning, and we're here to provide you with our fiscal year 2015 third budget update, as well as our diversity updates. Before I begin, I'd like to mention that our licensees have paid their full assessments for FY15. Last time I was here, you approved us to ask for the final payment against those assessments. They're in house right now, which has allowed us to transfer $17.5 million to the Community Mitigation Fund. So that fund is restored, all the licensing fees have been transferred to the appropriate places, and we are now operating on our licensees' payments.
That's great. That's a big milestone.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah, and you did a nice job of helping us wend our way through the cash issues.
It was I think, a thoughtful process, which all the staff and the commissioners came up with a good solution. So, thank you.
And all the initial borrowed funds from the rainy day fund have been restored long since.
Correct.
Right.
The $20 million has been restored,
Right.
as well as every single fund that was supposed to receive their percentage share of the license fees have been paid now.
Right.
Great.
So with that, I'd like to move on to the budget update. In your packet, you have a brief memorandum from me, our monthly revenue and spending spreadsheet that's updated on our website regularly, a detailed list of the proposed budget amendments, and a report of each division's budget and current spending against their budget. For this update, I mainly have good news to report. We have no changes projected right now for our FY15 revenue estimates. However, we have spending changes proposed that net out to a decrease in anticipated spending by about $1.3 million. $1.03 million. To go into detail on those, by object class in our JJs, we have reduced the anticipated chargeback for fingerprints from the state police by about $150,000. This is a result, state police were nice to us this year and are only charging us for half the cost, half-year costs. So that item cuts back to what we're actually going to use. But to offset that slightly, we've brought on some temporary help to help with licensing and processing all the applications, processing our vendor applications. So that item is increasing by $66,000, which nets out to $84,000 in the JJ object class. Once we get into facilities equipment, we're asking for an increase of $130,000. That will complete the build, purchasing cubes, desks for the build-out of the 24th floor. This will alleviate us spending that money in FY16. Since we had money available right now, we're proposing this. We also have a $26,000 reduction in that item, as we won't be buying one of the fingerprint units that we thought we might need if other casinos were opening up earlier. So we'll push that off until 17 or 18. We have enough units right now. MSP has enough. Our licensing unit has enough to get us through this initial push and then the next 2 years, 2.5 years.
Derek, is the fingerprint chargeback, is the fingerprint chargeback related to the fingerprint machines? Or are
No,
they
no,
totally
so
separate?
we
It's
get
the process.
charged, yeah, we actually get
Okay.
charged by the federal government for processing these.
Okay.
MSP does, and they push it back to us.
Great.
Under our grants line, we're decreasing by 80,000. We weren't able to get the small business grants for business development and training in regions A and B up off the ground. We've been focusing mainly on getting that effort in the slots region. We have a high hope that this will be done next year with Commissioner Stebbins and Joe Griffin, so.
Well, most of the program is we've been developing it. We're going to be helping the small businesses who would be ultimately vendors, suppliers to the
Correct.
operation of the casinos. If those are 2 years away, I think we have a window of time, but happy to see the money hopefully as part of the budget for FY16.
It is part of the current budget for FY16. And then under our IT and technology side, we have a decrease of 850,000. GTech, our vendor for the central management system, has determined that they would like the payments to start with the go-live date. So all the work they're doing right now on implementing and startup has no cost to the commission. It won't be until September approximately of next year that we'll start paying that monthly fee. We had decreased this last budget meeting. This is what was left for the year. We're just pulling it all off the table right now. We also had money left in the LMS project for phase 2, which we haven't begun yet. We keep tapping into it for phase 1 to complete, which I think has been very helpful with the number of applications that we've entered into the LMS, and the ability of our temps to enter in these applications with no prior experience on that system. So what we're doing is we're adding some money to finish out phase 1, and then the remaining amount that's left, which is 239,000, which we had dedicated for phase 2, we're just not going to spend this year, so we're taking that off the spending column. And then the last piece under the technology was we had set aside money in our last update for opening up the Plain Ridge floor. Our estimates from our independent test labs came in higher than what we had set aside. We're using some of that savings from the 850 and the LMS phase 2 to increase that budget item by 112,000. And we just had an update this morning that I think 2/3 of the machines are tested, or approximately 1,000 of the machines are tested, which is well ahead of schedule from where we had anticipated to be. So this item may come in lower on the spending side.
Will there be more testing for Plain Ridge on fiscal year 16, or does this increase finish up effectively that testing?
That should finish up this testing. So what we've done is we've purchased 2 Cobatron machines for the gaming agents in the time period before the CMS comes live, where our gaming agents can walk around with a manual process, checking the chips in the machine, making sure it's the right software, making sure it's what we've approved for that specific device. And then once the CMS comes online, it does a daily ping of the machines to make sure that the software is an approved software platform. So this should, for that type of startup testing, this should be it.
Okay.
Sorry for a long answer to your
No,
short
no,
question.
it's a complicated process.
So while this review is relatively good news, there's one piece, damper I have to put on. We still have not heard official word from the Governor's Office of Administration and Finance on our indirect waiver request. Our indirect waiver request has been approved the last 2 years, and
Explain what that is, Derek.
indirect cost agreements are mainly generated with an entity that receives direct federal funding. And what it's anticipated to do is take the cost of office space, overhead, general support staff, and allocate those costs, take a piece of each federal grant to make up for that grant's percentage share of the total portion of funding that doesn't come from federal funds or doesn't come from state appropriated funds. Any agency who doesn't have a direct federal grant has a automatic 10% assessment built against it, as I think it's chapter 60.
It's an overhead charge.
It's an overhead charge.
It's a Commonwealth overhead.
Commonwealth
The
overhead
Commonwealth's
charge.
overhead, right.
We have a waiver request in because we don't receive any state funding. So there's nothing to recuperate. We're paying directly for all of our the industry is paying directly for all of our costs. We pay our fringe benefits for our contribution, for the contribution to the retirement fund, which makes sense. But on the overhead, we pay chargebacks for every single state service that we use. So if you look in our budget, we have a state accounting chargeback, we have a human resources chargeback, we have an ITD chargeback, we have A&F IT support chargebacks. We pay all of those. We pay MSP. We're paying our share. So our waiver request is basically to say, this doesn't apply to us, even though there's a law in the books. Would you please approve it? So it could be 10% of our object classes, our spending in the salary object class, our consultant object classes, which could add between $1 million and $1.3 million to our budget. We think there's a very good likelihood, and we have a very good case, especially with past precedent, but I just wanted to put this on the record.
Where does that stand at the moment?
Right now, it stands with our analyst, and we had a conversation with A&F about it, and they understand our case. But it's also a tough revenue year for the state, so to take this off the books would be revenue that they haven't. So I just wanted to put that on the record. It may come back that this $1 million may not be sitting there at the end of the year. It may be going towards the indirect cost if we don't receive that waiver.
You know, we've had these requests before. When it was before Derek got here, it was me and another year, Director Day and me talking to the budget people at A&F, and they understand it. It's pretty straightforward. They can only approve it on a yearly basis. So, you know, I would have much rather had that settled once and for all, but that's not the way that works. So, you know, and this has also been a transition year of, you know, a new administration and, you know, having finding out who we need to talk to, etc. But there's already, we're paying for all those chargebacks. Everything that we utilize from the Commonwealth, we pay directly. IT, Mars, etc. So there's a straightforward business case for that.
Right. Well, if we end up having to pay the 10%, we should stop paying the chargebacks.
It's one way to look at it.
That's a separate waiver request.
Could turn off the lights, I suppose.
Okay, great. Thanks. Go ahead.
So that concludes my FY15 third budget update. Do you have any additional questions?
I don't think so.
I think it's very concise and well reported. You know, the templates that you used and implemented make it very easy to, at least for me, and to understand and follow. You have a typo in your memo relative to what we do with this overage, if you will. Whether we change the assessment this year or roll it over to the next year, which would be my preference. You know, decrease as we make the assessment for next year. You know, decrease it by, offset it by the $1,003,000, and just, you know, go from there. Especially since you have just received payments from this year.
Correct.
But I think it's great work to the team that you have too.
Yes, I concur. It's very easy to follow, to read, to understand, and I think your judgment is sound. The advice you give us with regard to this has been right on. So I thank you and the team for the hard work.
Thank you.
And substantively, it's a milestone because we're now out of debt. The commission's out of debt and operating on a budget that sustains us, and also that is created as the result of a process that includes those who are paying the fees that go into create our budget. So we've got a participatory process for creating the budget, a transparent way of distributing it, and a result that sustains us in our operations. I think that's a real milestone. So it's
just to be absolutely clear on that, so everybody understands, the Gaming Commission was originally funded by a loan from the Rainy Day Fund. That was the original funding mechanism. That loan of $20 million has now been paid back in its entirety.
Correct.
Well, yeah, if I could just add a footnote to that, we got 15 of the $20 million.
Correct.
The governor got 5 million to negotiate the compacts. We paid back the entire 20. So,
Right.
so we've in effect paid for the compacts as well, the compact negotiations.
And all of the funds that had destined to be funded are funded, not just the rainy day fund. The rainy day fund we paid back a while ago.
Right.
It's all funds, including the community mitigation fund that now have all the right balances.
Correct. And you won't see that on the spreadsheet here because that happened on May 5th, and we're only tracking through April on this, on
Right.
the overall spreadsheet. But it did happen on May 5th. I have confirmation from Maria that it happened on May 5th. You'll see it when the next update hits the website.
The other thing that really isn't identified clearly on the spreadsheet is that this is not just an exercise in recording numbers. I personally appreciate the continual reassessment. Where are we spending money? Is it necessary? Looking at priorities, looking at our business model continually, and I see that happening, and it's a very good practice, and I know one that you work hard to bring to our attention when you have an idea of a different plan or a couple of options to give us, to present to us. So that's appreciated. It's not just here it is. This is how we're spending money.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that as well.
And I think that goes back to what you, the commission, and Director Day have told us, always be open-minded. We need to think about what's best for the business environment as well as the regulatory environment. And our licensees have let us know when they have ideas of how we could do things better, and they do have good ideas. I mean, we just went through a long meeting to go over the FY16 budget with them, which we'll be presenting to you at the next commission meeting, and they had some very good input. They took time to do their research. They took in all the information we provided to them, and they had very thoughtful comments. So I think it is, whether we agree with all those thoughtful comments, I would say a good 80% we agree with. So it's been a very good process. It's been eye-opening to see it from both sides of the table.
Yeah, good.
Great.
Great.
Okay, next up.
So I don't know if we need a vote to approve those changes, Catherine, or? No, okay, so I'll just make those changes to our budget and update it for this month. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Agnes, who will go over a quick presentation on where we are with our benchmarks. Just as a reminder, these are the benchmarks that are set for us on a state level for minority, women, small business spending. I know we want to add veteran services to it, but the state still doesn't track that. Agnes is trying to work with Jill on how to get the veteran vendors and how we can work that in with our requirements to stick with statewide contracts, which is, I think, where, Mr. Chairman, you took a look at our report and saw that there was no veteran status on there. And we do acknowledge that. We do acknowledge that's a place we have to continue to work on. So with that, I'll turn it over to Agnes.
Good
Hold
morning.
the mic.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This year, so far, we're at about 83% of the year has gone by. And with our benchmarks for minority businesses, we've expended 23% of that number so far, which is $108,000. We've encumbered 603, so if the spending comes in the last 2 months, which normally in our accounts payable period, we should probably hit that benchmark of $473,000. The women-owned businesses, we've already exceeded that by 152%. With $1.4 million, our benchmark was at $947,000. And the small business benchmark, we've exceeded at 220%, 28% rather, at $450,000, and the benchmark was only at $197,000. We have encumbrances that will increase those numbers even further as the end of the year and accounts payable period comes to a close. The veterans that you were speaking of earlier, that was a 3% For the service-disabled veterans, which is a very small category, which the state does not track, there's only about 6 or 7 companies that are registered at this point, but I have contacted Coleman Nee, who was the previous Secretary of Veteran Services for the state, and he's provided me with a list of 92 veteran-owned companies throughout the Commonwealth, which we're researching. Many of them are in the construction services field like that, but there are several legal consulting firms, auditing firms, things like that, that we're researching to see whether or not they would fit in with us. So that's where we are today.
Let me,
Excellent, thank you.
the small help me understand the small business benchmark. Is some of the small business benchmark numbers floating over into the women and minority business?
Yes, in
Okay.
all 3 categories. If they count for all 3. So even if, like, I'm trying to think, New England Office Supply would fit into both the small business and the woman-owned business.
Okay.
So the expenditures there count for both of those benchmarks.
Okay. And does this still go with the state definition of a small business?
Yes,
500 employees or less?
yes.
Because we're talking about it, and, let's take the opportunity to hopefully have our message transmitted out over the airwaves to veterans who own a business. Step forward, identify yourself, not only think of some of the opportunities that we might have, but again, as we talk to our licensees, they're anxious to find you as well for any number of services, both in the construction phase and the ultimate operation phase. But as we've talked about ad nauseum here, it's a new thing. The legislature was very thoughtful in putting this into the statute. We have found a way within our licensing system to allow somebody to identify themselves as a veteran. But again, the drumbeat needs to go on that they've never been asked before. Now they have an opportunity to expand their business and secure some business opportunities for themselves. But they got to step forward. And Commissioner Zuniga and I met with Secretary Reyna, Mr. Nee's successor. Again, just look for every opportunity we can to talk this up, either on our website or licensee's website, but more obviously needs to be done.
This is great. We're clearly exceeding the benchmark in every aspect. I know where the calculation comes from. The 278, because it takes into account exceeding the prior benchmark. But I would really, it would be really helpful to me to have the projection of the total, as in where that 6% is either at or projected to be at. Perhaps we could do this for the end of the year. We know we're going to exceed it by some percentage, but maybe that's going to be 9%, if my calculation is roughly right, if we're exceeding it by 150%. But having those measures, which is something that we also ask our licensees in the context of, would be also very helpful.
Sure.
In addition, not in lieu.
We can do that as well.
Yep.
Commissioner Stebbins, am I right that we do not let our licensees double count? You can only qualify for one of the categories.
No.
I'm wrong on that?
You're wrong on that, yeah.
You positive?
Yep.
Okay.
If you're a woman and a minority, do you want to choose what to be?
Well, I've never had that problem.
Well, no, but if a woman and a minority is competing against just a minority, should that person have advantage over the other one, or preference? I would argue yes.
Well, there's 2 different questions. I mean, if it's the same, what I was concerned, I thought we were holding the licensees to a different standard from which we were holding ourselves. And in fact, if you can double count, it totally diminishes the significance of your numbers. You're getting credit for every dollar you spend that you double count. You're getting credit for $2, and it's not. I don't think that's what this was all about. This was not meant to figure out a way to shortcut the number of dollars actually, put out to suppliers, to non-traditional suppliers, by virtue of double counting. Now, maybe there's no way around that, but for starters, if we're doing it the same way with our licensees, then my concern is reduced, because so if that's right, then we can think about this on our own hook, but this is the way the state does it, and if we're doing it this way for our licensees, but I don't think we can pat ourselves on the back quite as much if we know that there's double counting going on, because it's just much less significant accomplishment.
So having been a
Why we
member
don't
of,
know that it's a much less significant.
I don't agree, yeah.
We don't know what percentage,
No, if
of
there is
double-
double, no, if
no,
there is
if
double
there is,
counting.
if there is some double counting, we still don't know the percentage of double counting, and therefore we don't know what single counting would do to these numbers. So I don't want to trash what we've done here without having facts with which to do it. And I think the double counting, triple counting discussion's an interesting one to have, but we set this up and we need to explore that. But we've still done it, I think, through some aggressive outreach and thoughtful work, a really good job here.
You know, a spreadsheet for us is in the next page, where you can see, you know, if there's
correct.
any kind of double counting,
Correct.
right there, that page. And, you know, it would be very easy to calculate, you know, what, if anything, is in two columns. For the most part, most of it is only one.
Right.
Correct. And this is a regular discussion. I can tell you I've been a member of the supplier diversity team, or a designee. I was a Secretariat Supplier Diversity designee for a while when I was in the executive branch. And this is a discussion that we have, same discussion you're having at over and over again, year after year. How do you really, what percentage do you put to it if it's if you're qualified for both categories? Are you going to split it 50-50? So it's usually done with just a disclaimer, and the group always comes back to a disclaimer. There are some areas where you have some double counting, but to get to Commissioner Zuniga's point, where do you put more of an emphasis? Where do you put less of an emphasis? So you just say, here's some double counting.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if we did similar to our licensees. I can check with Jill to make sure that we did a similar process with our licensees, so we're not holding them to a different standard, but.
It sounds like, from what other commissioners are
It
saying,
is.
that is right, but
Yep.
just for the heck of it, let's do double check.
Yeah.
8 of the 18 are double counted, you know, we don't,
See,
I don't know
I've
what the
never
dollars
looked at it as double counting.
No.
I don't think the phrase is accurate. I think we're talking about representing the community, and that person brings value into areas. That's what we're talking about, and, you know, whether it be, you know, a woman who happens to be a minority, whatever that case may be, I think you're absolutely bringing, you're representing what we're trying to do here in a couple of different areas. So I just have never looked at it and used it that way. I think it can be insulting, frankly, to someone who adds value to your organization.
Okay. But anyway, just for the heck of it, let's do double check and make sure we're consistent on the point.
Absolutely. We will.
Great.
And with that, I think we'll move on to Trupti for an update on our employee diversity.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Good morning.
This morning I'm here to provide you an update on our diversity and some of the staffing that we've done since December. So since I was here last, pleased to report that we've hired 21 additional employees in the gaming area and 18 seasonal folks within racing. If you recall, we have one track now, so many of those who we've hired in racing are rehires. 16 of the 18 were rehires, and within the 21 that we've hired, we're at staff level. So gaming agent supervisors, licensing folks, all of the areas who are, you know, having a higher volume of work and need due to the pen opening coming up. So with that said, thrilled to report that of the 21 we've hired, 38% were diverse candidates, or diverse hires, shall I say. And then if we were to include all of those numbers together, if you recall, when I was before you in December, we were at 21% diverse, for the agency as a whole, and we've been able to hit our goal of 25% that we were working towards. And much of that has been through continuing to work with various associations, having a broad-based network to reach variety of candidates for our hiring that we intended to do over the last, I would say, 6 months or so. And working very hard to qualify candidates through phone screens and in-person conversation, and bringing in a broad pool of candidates, or a high number of candidates, to ensure that we can have a broad, diverse pool of candidates for our hiring and identify qualified candidates. So that's the most important, making sure that we have the qualified candidates, and having some difficult decisions, actually, as a matter of fact, for managers where we have several strong qualified candidates to consider from. So we worked very hard with the managers to do that, and I think that we've had some great successes within our staff level, and that's the hiring that we did do. One of the things that we're looking ahead to utilizing is a tool that we've implemented recently, Taleo. We partnered with the Human Resources Division, the State Human Resources Division, to implement an applicant tracking system. And by using this system, we'll be able to ensure that we have a broad pool of candidates. As a diversity officer, I can take a look at the pool of candidates and ensure that we have that as part of our hiring. And we'll have better metrics around where we're identifying candidates from. So I think that we'll have more information to come in the coming months and years. I don't anticipate a huge swing in any direction as I look ahead at the FY16 hires. We don't have plans to hire many positions for FY16, but our goal is to continue to keep an eye on it, and this will be our opportunity to work with various associations, working with the Director of Workforce and Development, Jill, and continue to build network and relationships, and share, the type of hiring we intend to do, and have a broad pool of candidates for the position we intend to hire for. So, do you have any questions?
This new system that you're describing will also help us test the success of our outreach efforts, i.e. if we reached into a certain area to find candidates, it would tell us what the yield was on that outreach effort, right?
Exactly. So we will say, if I were to say, where did you hear about this particular position? I can say at the XYZ Association, and then we can start to do more work. Well, okay, we're not having successes in this particular area. Let's do additional outreach. Let's work with different associations to get the positions out there, yes. And this will also allow candidates to self-identify, which is something we don't have at the moment. So we'll be able to ensure that we have a diverse pool. So that's the initial starting point for us.
Right, okay, good.
Any other questions? Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good going, thank you.
I think that's it for us. Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. Good day.
Thank you, thank you all.
Next up, item 3E, Region C update. Director Wells.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission.
Good morning. Good morning.
On the agenda, on item E, little I, you have the KG Urban update. As you may recall, 2 weeks ago, I was in front of you and presenting what the status was for KG Urban. I can report to you today that yesterday I received one proposed term sheet, which was unsigned at approximately 1:20 in the afternoon, and then a second proposed term sheet with some significant changes at about 4:20 in the afternoon. So we've had a cursory review of those and taken a look at the conditions on that. those proposed term sheets. However, both are still unsigned. So my understanding from Mr. Conroy, who I've had communication with, is they're still in negotiations. I have not received any forms from GLPI, as was suggested at the last meeting, to help expedite the process, so the delay in signing the deal would not further delay the RFA2 process, but I have not received anything from GLPI to date. So that's really where we are right now. I'm still waiting.
The others, the KG and the Scott Butera and the Foxwoods, you've got the stuff from...
Well, what we would do with those would be similar to what we did with Mass Gaming and Entertainment, where they had been found suitable prior to, in the prior analysis when we were doing the slots parlor, for Foxwoods it was the Milford project, but for for Mass Gaming it was the slots parlor. But in any event, we would do a suitability update. So it's similar to what we did with Mass Gaming and Entertainment. There's been some changes with the, obviously with the LLC with Foxwoods. We did have a call scheduled for Friday, and that was canceled. So we need to get an idea of because of that change, if that would mean any change in qualifiers, but we can do that as part of the suitability process. I'm not as concerned about the Foxwoods piece and because they had been through the process already, so we're somewhat familiar with the players there. We would just need to do some adjustments, which would be normal as part of the suitability investigation that's ongoing.
I think Commissioner Zugna amended our motion to find KG's team pretty much substantially complete, to say that they should come back in 2 weeks and give us an update. And I gather Attorney Conroy is
he's
here to do that? Is now the right time?
I have you better than Attorney Conroy, or not better, but I feel that I made you a promise 2 weeks ago, so.
Identify who you are.
Andrew Stern, operating partner, KG Urban. Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Afternoon.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Judge. Commissioner Zuniga did add his codicil, or whatever I guess we would legally call it, to the substantially complete vote last week for what I believe was incremental progress and a report in 2 weeks. We do not have a signed term sheet. The purpose of showing the various drafts, one was, although it was provided yesterday, and I apologize that it was provided so late, that was dated May 20th, which came after our de facto general counsel in New York, Mark Lehrer, and his joint venture specialist and his joint venture partner and REIT partner spent days and hours on that term sheet with GLPI, which was the roll up our sleeves meeting I promised didn't actually require anyone to get on a train. It was all done by telephone and email. And then another draft that was actually done yesterday, a new draft, during the day before it was forwarded. So the first one was actually a week old, forwarded yesterday. The second one forwarded yesterday was a few hours old. That was done to show the incremental progress that's been made, and for the purposes of demonstrating, I think, more meat on the bones for structure, which was one of the major issues for Director Wells in determining the need for the entity to qualify. And so that is the answer to our incremental progress, with the caveat to the vote that was taken 2 weeks ago. As for the question of the need for the application from GLPI, now obviously I'm not an officer or an employee of GLPI. I have been personally working with Senior Vice President Steve Snyder, and to a slightly lesser extent with Brandon Moore, who's their general counsel. I don't function in a legal capacity, so I try to leave, lawyers will laugh at this, but I try to leave the legal work to the lawyers, which is difficult as a recovering prosecutor, but I try. GLPI's position, they're not refusing so much to submit an application or do the work. They are in this business and obviously are licensed in many jurisdictions, so they have the wherewithal, obviously, to fill out an application. they are taking the position to which I'm not unsympathetic, to be frank with the commission, that the very essence of what a REIT is makes them, by definition, a landlord and a funding source. I even had this conversation with our banker, David Berman at Macquarie, who's one of the foremost gaming bankers in the industry, that they are unique in what they do, and that as a landlord and a funding source, they will have no role in any part of the operation. They will own or lease no slot machines, chips, tables. They will not employ anybody. They will serve no food or drink, do no marketing or promotion, or have any role in it, provide no gifts to winners, lease no hotel rooms. In addition to employing no people, they will have no vendor relationships with any vendors who are certified by the commission to vend or lease the machines, the tables, the equipment, kitchen equipment, anything else. And that as a result, their position is they feel they shouldn't have to prove a negative that they are not a qualifier as an entity. That somehow the regs should be, somebody should demonstrate to them. And this is with great respect to Director Wells, who has been a terrific facilitator and worked closely with our lawyers and with GLPI and its lawyers. That is their position as best as I can state it at this time.
So Mr. Stern, you started your conversation by telling us that they have been found suitable or have done this paperwork in other jurisdictions in order to be, in order to move forward in other jurisdictions, and then you go on to tell us that they don't want to do it here. Could you explain that? I should rephrase. Some of their officers who were
National.
yeah, their officers have been as they were with this commission were have been qualified before.
Commissioner, it's a good question. Let me just, this is Kevin Conroy. I think we're a little bit in a catch-22 here, which is Director Wells needs a completed term sheet in order to determine whether GLPI is a qualifier. We do not have a completed term sheet to give to Director Wells for her to make that determination. GLPI, however, would like the opportunity when Director Wells is ready and when we've got a completed term sheet to show Director Wells, to make an argument to Director Wells as to why they should not be subject to suitability. If Director Wells says that they are subject to suitability, GLPI has told us that they will file the applications. So it just we haven't had an opportunity yet to have a good discussion with Director Wells about whether GLPI is a qualifier or not, because Director Wells needs a completed term sheet to do that. That's the point.
Are the debated points in the term sheet the points that you just got through saying are the points that would exempt them from being a qualifier? Are you debating whether or not they're going to have a management role or?
Oh, no, not at all. They do not. They do not. A REIT cannot own.
Right.
Does not own a license. They're not the owner of the license, and they do not own any fixtures or equipment.
So the
in a casino.
So the terms of the term sheet, which are not yet concluded, don't, in your judgment at least, have anything to do with the reasons why the REIT would not be a qualifier?
No, they're economic. They're just the only reason the term sheet is not signed is.
What's your perspective?
Well, wait, go ahead.
Yeah, I will say, I'm a little hesitant to opine about their agreement when they don't have an agreement. Because I don't think the commission should be in the position of impacting negotiations between the other parties. If I say X, Y, or Z, they may change the direction, and then we are telling them, in effect, how to do the deal. That is why I'm waiting to see for certain what their deal is, then I'll make a determination. That's the correct approach from a regulatory perspective.
I think that's absolutely essential. The events of default, for example, may have an impact on a lot of things. A lot of the terms, although they don't give them an ownership interest in the facility, could have an impact on how the facility operates. So I think that's absolutely right. I think Mr. Conroy's suggestion as to the sequence that needs to be followed is absolutely right. It's not substantially different from yours, Mr. Stern, but you need to see what the term sheet says and then figure out from the term sheet, at least, whether or not they're a qualifier and give them an opportunity to say why not.
I think the only point I was making about the term sheet that we've submitted, the drafts that we've submitted, and the reason why we submitted them was to demonstrate that what GLPI does and that it can't go beyond what it does as a REIT. It can't own a license and it can't own and doesn't own or and does not operate.
But that doesn't necessarily end the inquiry.
No, but we submitted the drafts so that Director Wells could see that the things that cannot and that won't and can't change for GLPI as a REIT are not changing. As the drafts change, the structure is the structure, and to the extent that there were substantial changes, it was to show that that was for the purpose also of showing the incremental progress that Commissioner Zuniga asked us to demonstrate.
What I thought, and although I wasn't here at the last meeting, I thought that the premise was that the GLPI KG Urban deal had been done long ago, and so this comes as a bit of a surprise to me. Maybe I didn't read closely or listen attentively, but I thought that the last time I checked in on this was that KG Urban was happy to announce that the land purchase was by GLPI, and that deal was done, and the equity financing would come from you yourselves.
Well,
I thought that's maybe that was an aspirational statement, but I thought it was a done deal.
Well, it was far more than aspirational. And by the way, the REIT, it's not the land; it's the land and the improvements to it, meaning the buildings itself, the casinos.
No, I understand.
Now, if I can step back here for a moment and just ask for the Commission's forbearance for a moment. Obviously, I played a very personal and major role in pushing to have Regency open to commercial licensing in the first place. And I think it's fair to owe this Commission just a little bit of context about the last 45 days. It's 6 weeks now. When the mayor sat here with Barry Gosson, and what was that extension was asked for, obviously it was needed to satisfy the equity requirement. That was the reason for the need for it. And what we had as a result of having the host community agreement, as I said last time when Commissioner McHugh wasn't here, was that gave us the ability to tell equity sources or somebody like GLPI two things that we had not been able to previously say is what can we build in terms of density, height, and what will our local payments be, which is the equivalent of telling someone what your real estate taxes will be. But it was really, there was another aspect to that in terms of what we had to do, which was different than why we needed the extension for regulatory purposes. We had been at a standstill for 18 months because of the impasse with the mayor in terms of design engineering, cost estimating, all the things that go to the moving parts that go to putting a financing deal together of any kind to build anything. The mayor has been a terrific ally and has exceeded any expectations since we signed that deal. Has put his people at our disposal. And I will say we filed our ENF the day after I was last here. The city in 3 days, the city did its review of our draft. But the problem was, we were at a dead standstill for 18 months because sitting in a room together doing a charrette ourselves, designing things and hoping if the mayor ever met with us, he would like them, wasn't gonna help us. We knew what the last mayor had liked, but simply sitting together and doing an academic exercise and paying architects and engineers and doing new cost estimates for whatever they playfully designed was of no use to anybody. So when we finally made our deal with the mayor, from a dead stop, we had to take what we had agreed to with the mayor in terms of density, layout, programming, and put our design team not back together, it was together. One of our linchpins, our casino architect from Las Vegas, had retired in the interim. On the 20th of March, we signed the deal on the 19th. On the 20th, I retained a rock star architect from Las Vegas who had a long history with Steve Wynn, doing work for Steve Wynn and designing and building the Rio with Tony Marnell. He jumped in right away with our team in New York. And we started with the programming based on the agreement with the mayor and all the square footages that our HCA allowed, and design based on the programming. We had to go back to Tishman's Casino Group, which has built City Center and the Borgata and the Water Club and casinos all over the country. Have been working with us for 7 years. I've put 8 years of my life into this. And it was like compressing everything we had done in 7 or 8 years back into 45 days. All of the discussions with potential equity sources, including Scott Butera's discussions with GLPI, which eventually bore fruit, were dependent essentially, like a giant machine, depending on the machining of individual parts. So we were talking to the equity sources, showing them the HCA, but also redoing the program, the design, the engineering, the cost estimating, all at the same time that we were trying to do that. And working with the mayor to plan for a referendum on a project that we were reprogramming and redesigning at the same time. And that is why I am not sitting here with a signed term sheet with GLPI today, only drafts that have been continuously updated since what we gave Director Wells, I guess, on the, whenever, before the last time I was here, and then yesterday from the 20th, and yesterday from yesterday. There's been no lack of effort and lack of work, and lack of, use your cliche, nose to the grindstone, burning the midnight oil. We're trying really hard after 8 years of this. We pushed you very hard to give us this opportunity, but we couldn't do anything until the 19th of March. And then suddenly we had to do everything after the 19th of March, and we have been doing everything.
You know, Mr. Stern, I simply don't buy that. I buy that you don't have to, you have to do reprogramming and do a lot of things contingent of the HCA. But I don't think that's dependent on the equity sources, identifying your equity sources. You've had 3 years to put, at least the general financing piece, the equity piece. That's what we always needed for region, for phase 1. And that only came about very recently, and you still don't have a signed term sheet. Let me mention something about what I amended last meeting. And the incremental progress hinged on 2 things. A term sheet, as an executed term sheet, or the submission of additional qualifiers from whomever, GLPI or whoever was going to be your equity source, right? I understand, as you described, Mr. Conroy, that one is dependent on the other. That leaves us only with a term sheet, which you still don't have executed. Where are you on that?
Well, the whole point of, I think, of giving you the latest draft yesterday afternoon, which was done yesterday, right, was forwarded as soon as it came back from GLPI.
Right. Now, where are you on executing?
On signing it?
Yes.
I think we're pretty close. I don't have any reason to believe otherwise.
That's what you told us 2 weeks ago, though.
I said we had work to do. I said we were going to roll up our sleeves. We said incremental progress. I think we've made better than incremental progress. It's not signed, but I'd like to respond to the other thing you just said, since you said you don't buy what I told you.
No, the piece about identifying your equity source dependent on a host community agreement.
It's more than dependent on a host community agreement, because when you build anything, as you know probably better than I do, whether it's an apartment building or an office building or a shopping mall or cold storage, you have to know what you can build in terms of floor area ratio or density or whatever the jurisdiction calls it. You have to know what it's going to, you have to know what your real estate taxes are going to be, and you have to know what it's going to cost to build. You can't know what it's going to cost to build until you know what you're going to be permitted to build, what you're going, how high you can go, whether you have to go out wider instead of taller. When the mayor insisted that the hotel only be 11 stories and no taller, the footprint of the hotel became bigger in order to put 300 rooms in it. We knew we needed 300 rooms. His gaming analyst agreed that we needed 300 rooms, but he wouldn't let us go higher than 11 stories for reasons that he's the mayor. That meant the footprint of the building, if you can't go up, you got to go out. So the footprint of the building became wider. That meant more steel. All right, we had to go back to Tishman for the first time since 2013. Every equity source, you can identify them, you can know who they are. GLPI, I could name the others. I don't think it's fair to them to name them since we didn't bring them to you.
Don't feel compelled.
But they're going to ask all the same questions. What can you build? What are the payments to the locality and the state gaming tax, which everybody knows? And what is it going to cost to build it? And the biggest question we got after the HCA was, what is this project going to cost? And the most recent estimates we had were, number one, 2 years old, and number two, for something other than what we had just agreed with the mayor, that he had said that we had agreed, okay, we'll build it the way you want it built. So, I mean, I'm telling you the God honest truth. I've never told this commission or the media or anyone else in Massachusetts anything else. That is a fact. Equity sources want to know what it's going to cost to build something because that affects their returns. I'm not even a finance person. You are. You know
Yes,
that.
if you're doing,
Okay,
I am.
Can I just,
Go ahead.
do you want to pursue that a minute more? Because I
Well-
wanted to jump in and see if we couldn't move the conversation in a little bit different direction. But I don't want to jump on you.
The only,
If you have more.
you are right if you're modeling everything, your pro forma, your enterprise on the cost approach. I get that, yes. But you could also do that on the revenue approach, and you can reconcile the two.
The revenues have not
Well,
have
the
not
revenue-
changed as much, but the costs change based on what we can build.
Well, yes, and that's where you make your decision as to how much risk can you take or the equity sources can take. But there's market studies that have been done for that region that are also gonna, and population and, number of people that could visit that casino that could actually get you, or the equity sources that you name, comfortable as to what that overall total cost can be.
Every one of them asked for cost estimates. I mean,
Okay.
construction estimates was what everyone has said, fine, this is great, give us the cost estimates.
Let me just see if I can jump in here, because I apologize if I'm jumping in and at the same time jumping off, because I wasn't here at the last meeting. But as I read the condition here, it was to come back with a status on progress of the term sheet or the submission of additional qualifiers. And the purpose of this, as I understand it, is to allow the IEB to begin to think about and plan for the investigations that are necessary in order to do the qualification, the suitability thing before the end of time. So you still have a way to go on the term sheet. I've not heard you say that was GLPI's draft to you and you're prepared to accept it. I haven't heard anything that remotely suggests that. But it seems to me that if this deal is going to be done, it's a deal with GLPI. Now, I understand GLPI is reluctant to put itself out as a qualifier, but at the same time, the IEB needs to plan. And so what is wrong with getting on the phone and saying to GLPI, we need to tell the commission that you're prepared to be a qualifier if you get this deal, and give us a list so that Director Wells can begin the planning for the investigation, and then there would be a meeting at which GLPI or the individuals could say that and convince, if they could, Director Wells, that they need not be qualifiers. Now, I don't know whether that would satisfy you, Director Wells. I'm just trying to move this thing forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think for timing, I think what might be helpful if the commission's inclined to go forward based on what they're hearing today is that we could identify if GLPI is a qualifier, there would be qualifying entities and qualifying individuals associated with it. It's not as if GLPI just submits one BED. Do that list. They should have those forms done and ready to go. My concern is the delay in, okay, you get the term sheet, then you have a meeting, then you talk about who's going to qualify, then they need 3, 4, 5 weeks to fill out the forms, then we wait for those, and then we start the investigation onto that piece of it. What I'm trying to do is expedite the process, and so far, I'm still in the same place. So that's...
So the condition last week was not just the identification of qualifiers, it was the submission of...
I'm not sure what the exact language is. I'd have to
That was
look
a
at
big
it.
part of our conversation.
That was.
I was very explicit. Give us the qualifiers and let us get started, then you work your deal out later.
I think it was the identification, and I'm prepared to satisfy this commission as best I can, and here's what I can offer. I can push on the business side for the term sheet to get from where it is to execute it. I don't think there's a chasm between the two sides. And I can have Kevin Conroy, who's sitting next to me, reach out to counsel at GLPI and push for what I'm hearing, which is from Director Wells, which is to tee up the dominoes so that if or when they are determined to be a qualifier, the names are known of who the individuals are. I can't imagine it would take 4 to 5 weeks to do applications.
I thought that's exactly what we asked you 2 weeks ago, though. I thought you told us that the term sheet is imminent, and we're going to roll up our sleeves and execute it. Or that was the part of the condition. We will show some incremental progress in getting you all either the list or the applications of all those qualifiers.
I thought we were asked to show incremental progress on the term sheet.
Well,
And I think two drafts of a term sheet with substantial red line changes is better than incremental progress.
You'll remember my comments, and I reread these recently from our meeting, from our transcript, that I have seen in my previous life any number of drafts of agreements that, not executed, are as good as a paper that they're written on. Until they are executed, you have a deal.
I agree with you, but that doesn't mean we haven't made incremental progress as was demanded of us, and we've been working our tails off to make incremental progress.
Fair enough.
It isn't. I'm not denying that it's not signed today, but I believe we've made the incremental progress that was demanded of us, which is between where we were, which was simply a structure term sheet from GLPI of how their deals work, with our property enumerated in it, and one with extremely specific participation rent clauses in it, and a whole number of other terms that apply very specifically to KG and GLPI, put in there by their attorneys and 3 lawyers who specialize in REITs and joint ventures from our side. Where we were several weeks ago was something submitted to Director Wells to demonstrate how GLPI's deals work from a structural standpoint. And we were very straightforward then that was simply a what we'll call a dummy term sheet to show how their deals work, that it was not, that we had not rolled up our sleeves yet. I said we were going to roll up our sleeves. We have. We spent a lot of money on lawyers to do it. I'm not disagreeing with, I'm not contesting that it isn't signed and executed, but incremental progress, I did not believe that was being defined as signed and executed. I apologize if I misunderstood that.
I believe I know where you stand, and thank you.
I believe we can have it signed quite soon.
Okay. Does any of us know whether GLPI is, and its individuals and institutions are a qualifier, are licensed elsewhere in any other jurisdictions?
It's my understanding that GLPI in certain states is a qualifier, in certain states is treated as a gaming vendor, in certain states is not a qualifier or licensed at all.
So the question was, are they considered a qualifier in some? It sounds like they are.
I believe that's the case, Commissioner.
What troubles me here is that it seemed to me that if GLPI shared with you the optimism that this is going to get done pretty soon and cared at all about this, rather than putting you in a position of having to come back here and tell us, after all we said about get your qualifiers, they've put you come back here with not a happy position to try to explain to us on their behalf why they don't even want to be a qualifier. But if they're already qualifiers, the forms have got to be pretty well near filled out. A hint of good faith and commitment on their part would be either to forget about not being a qualifier or just give us the stuff on a contingent basis. It's got to be 2/3 done, and indicate some good faith. But instead, you're here hanging by a thread.
I have to say that they are blameless. All right, I'll take the hit for this. All right? They have been acting in very good faith. And Steve Snyder said to me yesterday, I hoped we would be further along at this point. All right? They are not acting in any sort of bad faith, and we did not ask them to come here and explain anything to them. I didn't ask them to join us today.
But if that's the case and they're a qualifier elsewhere, why not just give us the stuff?
But in Maryland, which was one of their most recent, they were found not to be a qualifier. And there is sort of a brave new world here of the idea of a gaming REIT that functions as they do. There are virtually nobody else who does what they do. And they are being treated, as Kevin said, there's some head scratching going on, and there's a vendor in some places, and then Maryland said they're a funding source and a landlord. Now, Massachusetts isn't Maryland. But this is not a lack of good faith on their part. They forwarded us that marked up final term sheet yesterday specifically so that the commission would have their very latest comments on where their heads are on the term sheet. It was in response to our latest proposal on various terms. It doesn't change what they do or how things are structured, and we wanted Director Wells, like I said, to see the structure of a REIT deal that is sticking where it is. I can go back to New York today and say what I told my folks this morning is we got to get this thing signed. The commission is going to demand of me today, if it's not executed now, when is it going to be executed?
What's the answer to that question?
Well, I can't necessarily predict the future, but the answer is it should be. There's no reason it shouldn't get signed.
No, I know that, but that one could have said that all along. I mean, and that's not to say anybody's been. And I know these things are tough. I mean, those negotiations are tough. The motion, though, because we've been talking about this for some time, the minutes reflect that the motion that was passed last week said that you were required to come back in 2 weeks with status on the progress of the term sheet or the submission of additional qualifiers as discussed. Those were phrased in the alternative. And it seems to me I know there was more discussion, but that was the motion. And it seems to me that you've come back with status on the progress of the term sheet. It also seems to me that this has the potential to go on forever. And it seems to me, therefore, that the Commission's next step ought to be to set the drop-dead date.
We've done that. We've done the drop-dead date a number of times in the past. And we've had a number of discussions about substantial completion.
Right.
And I could go into, all of those dates, but that's not the point. I thought, the way that I recall the conversation, in addition to what's in the minutes, was that we were deeming the applicant substantially complete. I amended it to include subject to that update. I would ask that we retake that vote now or later and deem them substantially complete or not, based on the information that we now have.
Well, I think it's more helpful to be specific and to understand exactly where this team is and what our expectations are. I think frankly, it is a little bit, it was a little unclear. It's not as clear as just saying yes or no. I have found this conversation to be helpful. I think there is an understanding that, as the chairman said last time, our patience is not something that's unlimited. We understand the needs of IEB. We also have another applicant here who is, we have to be fair to everyone in the process. Some of those earlier votes were when the whole region was unsettled and we did not have clear direction. But I think at this point we're looking at very clear two applicants and we need to give very clear direction here. If we're looking at moving this ahead, but we want to be very clear about it. I really did like the idea of a deadline here, so we are not having the same conversation a month from now, because that would not be productive. So I'm prepared
I'm getting worried about a pattern here. I'm getting worried that we've extended this deadline for a number of, all incrementally, and a number of reasons, all in the spirit of competition. But I think this pattern can be troublesome if it's only for the spirit of competition. Let me talk a little bit about that. It's not just the current applicant. There's somebody out there potentially who could have used all this time to put together a proposal, at least in theory. There's a third applicant that dropped 2 weeks ago who could say, at least hypothetically, I could have used 4 more weeks to finalize my own deal. So the ongoing extension of this deadline, and I understand there's leeway in this whole notion of substantial completion, is, to me, is a little troublesome in the context of everything that we've done.
So are you saying we should cut it off today? And
Yes.
not, okay, that's the bottom line, right?
That's the bottom line.
You want a deadline and you want it to be today.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think all our decisions in every region have been fact-based, and there have been differences in every region for a number of reasons. And so we really haven't had any that I'm aware of, any circumstance in which it wasn't a fact-based decision. So that's what I'm taking into consideration here today.
And the fact is that we don't have a deal. They don't have a deal. They don't have a sign, you know. And the other piece of the condition was, you know, dependent on having a deal, apparently, or not. So, as the motion from last week was, it was to deem them substantially complete. You were prepared to go along, and you did. I amended it to include, to show progress that I don't see now. So I would like to have us another vote,
Yeah.
again, now or later, to whether we are effectively redoing that vote of deeming them substantially complete. And if there's no
gray
secret,
area in what we said 2 weeks ago, and I actually would like, before we take a vote, I'd like to hear more about Commissioner McHugh's idea on being clear in our expectations.
Well, I would, to be clear, propose, hypothetically, I'm not making this motion now, that we deem KG Urban substantially complete, provided that we have a completed term sheet by a week from today. Signed.
Oh, 2 weeks, at our next
No.
meeting? 1 week from today.
I mean, it could be 2 weeks,
Yeah, whatever.
but that's what I would do. The deal, you know, this is like a lot of other deals. It's like a lot of other things, and one of the problems with trying to tailor the deadlines to the circumstances of the case is that the deadlines lose their deadline potential. And I share
Because they're not credible.
because they're not credible. And I share Commissioner Zuniga's concern about that. On the other hand, I've seen the ENF. There's a lot of work been done on this. This is not just somebody's wishful thinking, right? And there's been a lot of money, obviously, put into it. And there's a lot of energy put into the deal, even though I haven't seen the term sheet. I can imagine what energy's been put into that. But at some point, there is a cost benefit to trying to make the deal perfect. And if the cost is that perfection is going to mean you can't meet a deadline, then perhaps, and the whole deal's gonna be of no force and effect, then that's gotta be taken into account in terms of who surrenders what when. And it seems to me the time has come now, and with all sympathy for your position, to say a very short time, but here it is. This is the time. Now factor that piece in to your cost, reward, ROI, whatever it is, calculus, and that's a piece that's now in play and in place. That would be my approach.
If you're suggesting that is, to go back to your first comment about setting a week from today as a hypothetical deadline for having in our hands a copy of a signed term sheet between the two parties.
Right.
I'd be curious to know, I guess, with Director Wells, as to whether a week after that, which would be our next regularly scheduled meeting, that we would have we could call for some element or some progression in the discussion of the suitability, whether GLPI would be deemed a qualifier, and setting that next meeting date is a time for GLPI to be present here, so Mr. Stern isn't carrying their water for them, to argue for or against whether they would be deemed a qualifier.
Yeah, I think that's an IUB decision. I don't
Right.
think that's a
Right.
commission
No, no,
decision.
right.
For starters.
So
Right.
the-
It's a decision that starts with you. I guess my question is, term sheet a
Right.
week from today,
Set up a meeting Thursday, set up a meeting Friday. We'll have a
Right.
discussion on the term sheet, we'll make a determination about the qualifiers, and then they can get their paperwork in 7 days from then.
Well, I would go along with an executed, something very crisp and clear, which is an executed term sheet 1 week from today. Which can then, because seemingly that is the critical path here. Because without it, we don't know who qualifies. Because without it, we don't know if they can, they will submit applications, et cetera, et cetera. So if we simply left it at, 1 week from today with an executed term sheet, then they can, then the IUB goes to work, there's meetings, they will report as early as a week after, but we no longer have what ended up being a bit of a not clear enough amendment to the motion you made from 2 weeks ago. This one would be a lot more clear, and it hinges on, whatever the latest draft is, but with the signature of the parties at the bottom.
Just my 2 cents worth on that. I happen to agree with Commissioner Zuniga that we would be well within our rights to say that we didn't get what we looked for, that this was not enough incremental progress. I think we would be well within our rights to cut it off today. I happen to not think that would be appropriate because I do agree that this has been a useful conversation. I think things like the ENF are non-trivial, but I also agree that it's time for a deadline. And I could live with either a week or our next meeting. The question that I have about doing it this week, as a practical matter, the commission can't do anything. Staff can, but the commission can't do anything. So if something is presented a week from today, there could easily be a week go by where nobody knows what's happening. Is it over or not? Because we can't get together to talk about it. And I don't think that is good for anybody. And so as a practical matter, I don't want to make it a week just sort of to be tough and then have a second week, which is kind of a waste of time. So I would be inclined to say pick a day or two prior to our next meeting, say for the sake of discussion, July 9th, in order that Karen has a chance to review it.
June.
Sorry, June.
Let's not get carried away.
Yeah. What do you say about July 9th, Commissioner? So that we have staff has a day or two to look at it, and so that we can then be advised at a meeting where we can act on whether this has been satisfied or not.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm looking, one, to give Director Wells more time. I think 2 days before the meeting.
Excuse me, Bruce, not to do what all you were talking about doing. You were talking about resolving the issue of whether they're a qualifier or not. And I wasn't suggesting that could get done. I was just suggesting staff, that Karen and others could opine and analyze whatever is submitted, the term sheet presumably, and be prepared to advise us. It would postpone the start of the qualifier discussion by 5 days, what I'm talking about. She could start it, but she'd start it on June 9th rather than on June 4th.
If there's a signed term sheet.
If there were a signed term sheet.
That contains concrete terms.
So, that would be my 2 cents. You guys,
I think
anybody?
what would be helpful to me in the process is to really get a defined date and almost a time, that it would be noon on whatever date. And then I guess the question if there's a delay between then and the commission meeting, what happens if, there's a deadline of
They miss the deadline.
date?
No, the whole point, what we're considering here is the hard stop. the, you know, the curtain, the iron curtain will
This is the
close.
guillotine instead of the butter knife.
Yeah.
That-
That's right.
Trying to scratch
You'll
the
enjoy
fuzzy
your
blanket.
flight home, Mr.
Do you
Stern.
want to wire my chair up here? I'll come back in 2 weeks, put the cone on my head?
So, so if you're comfortable with it, you were the one who was talking about this motion. If you're comfortable with it, it would, Tuesday is the 9th, right? Right. Go ahead.
Is that,
Chairman, I was just going to mention trying to get information into the packet and process. That'll only leave actually our deadline is Monday the 8th to get information into the packet and.
Although I
but
wouldn't
we
put
wouldn't,
the
we
term
wouldn't
sheet
need,
in
we
the-
wouldn't need the
wouldn't go in
term
the
sheet
packet.
into the packet. All we would want is Director Wells to get verbal report that she's got the signed term sheet.
So if we made it 5 o'clock, close of business on Tuesday, June 9th, and give Director Wells the authority to determine whether or not she gets what she wants on that date. If she doesn't, it's over. If she does, she then has Wednesday to take a look at it, and staff have a chance to look at it, and then to be able to talk with us about it, report to us on Thursday, and we will know, since once we get whatever we get by that date and time, you will know whether you need to invite the applicant to come.
My execution. Can I just add that the onus is entirely on KG to deliver that executed term sheet, not GLPI, and that this is buck stops with us on the term sheet, but that if we should be so fortunate that we deliver it to you, and that we have an executed term sheet and not an executed operating partner, GLPI has made it very clear to us, and I think they did with Director Wells in the one phone call, the scoping call, that they will be extremely cooperative in both helping determine qualifiers and in hashing out whether the entity is a qualifier, and then if they are determined to be, in providing the application. I don't have any doubt about that once we deliver you a term sheet.
Right. I think on that issue, it's the proof of the pudding is in the eating, but we'll take what you say at face
Well,
value.
we've dealt with a number of the principles before, and so
Yeah,
we have
true.
reason for optimism there.
True. If you are in agreement with that, would you frame a motion?
All right, I move that the commission consider the application of KG Urban substantially complete, provided that KG Urban submits to the Investigation and Enforcement Bureau no later than 5 o'clock p.m. on Tuesday, June 9, 2015, a completed signed term sheet, signed, that is, by all parties all parties to the contract.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion?
What happens if they don't?
We'll have a
In that
report
motion.
from
Give an
Director
extension.
Wells on Thursday.
Ask for another extension?
Oh.
No, I just
Okay,
want to
no,
put, put it in the
no,
flesh.
that's a
Because there's a proviso.
legitimate- That's a legitimate question. So let me restate the motion. To put in the self-executing piece that will obviate the need for this conversation if it doesn't happen. And so let me withdraw that motion and say that I move that the commission consider the application of KG Urban substantially complete, provided that no later than 5 o'clock p.m. on Tuesday, June 9, 2015, they submit to the Investigation and Enforcement Bureau a term sheet signed by all parties to the contract, and further provided that if they fail to provide a term sheet of that description by that date and time, that the commission deem their application not substantially complete.
Second that one?
I second that one.
Okay. This is pretty high stakes. Staff, anybody thought, are we missing anything? Does that seem like? Okay. Further discussion? All in,
Maybe John might know this question. Or the attorneys here, just thinking in terms of timing for costs and expenditures by the city of New Bedford in preparing for the post-community referendum vote. printing of ballots, costs of the ballots, costs of connected with the vote itself.
Pursuant to our regulations, the applicant shall cover the costs of that election, and I would assume that the applicant here agrees that under any circumstances that they would cover those costs for the city, regardless of outcome here.
This applicant is bound by the regulations that cover applicants. I don't have them in front of me, but I'll take the attorney's word for it that whatever the regulations say apply to us.
But one curiosity would be what happens if they are no longer an applicant by the date of the referendum?
That's right. That's right. When is the referendum?
June 23rd.
June 23rd.
June 23rd. And when would they need a waiver to move forward prior to?
They would need to have a notice before us at our next regularly scheduled meeting by June 11th.
June 11th.
They need at least more than 4 days to submit the notices to the citizens under election law.
I'm pretty sure your regs make clear that we have to pay the costs even if we are no longer an applicant.
Mm-hmm.
I may be,
Yeah.
I may be wrong about that, but I do think you have a provision in there that says that, and
Yeah.
just because you were nervous about this purpose. And certainly KG is gonna abide by the regulations that have been laid out. Attorney Silverstein is here. We have had some conversations about the referendum and costs. I think this is something that we can work out with the city. If the city's got concerns, we can figure it out. But I do think your regulations address this issue.
I'll go on Attorney Conroy's word.
I want to hear from Attorney Silverstein, who's right behind me.
Do you have something to add?
No, Commissioners. I would
just saying no, they can hear it.
I would just say that we've provided cost estimates of the election in its various components to KG. KG Urban has committed to paying those costs. The most immediate cost is the notice regarding the pre-suitability vote. I think a month or so ago, a draft of that was provided to the Ombudsman, and my understanding is that that will be taken up at the Commission's next meeting for approval. The form of that notice hasn't changed, just some details filled in terms of dates of times for the election. So I'm hearing a renewed commitment by KG Urban that those costs will be covered. They're not only required to be covered under your regulations and the statute, but also under the host community agreement.
Okay, is that satisfactory?
Yeah, again, it's kind of a side question for us to think.
Any further discussion on Commissioner McHugh's motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Okay.
Have a good flight home.
12 more days.
Thank you.
No, good luck. Good luck. I know how much hard work you put into this, so I hope you can pull this off.
Thank you for taking the time to look at the
Thank you.
Thanks,
We only have, oh, no, we got more from Karen. It's 1 o'clock. We can probably get through everything in less than an hour and get done. Would you rather do that than, do we need
Take a
a break?
now.
Yeah.
If you want to take a break now, go ahead.
Okay, let's take a 5 or 10 minute break, then we'll. Break, not lunch. We're just gonna power through. There's not much left. I think it won't be less than an hour. Okay. So we'll take a quick break and we will adjourn, reconvene in 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, we are reconvening at 1:05 for hopefully not too much more. We have Director Wells back.
Mr. Chair, if I
Okay,
might,
Mr.
we
Dayback.
just go to item number 5,
Okay.
Plain Ridge Park Casino update. I just have a few things I wanted to mention real quick. One is we'll have the, on June 11th as well, we'll have the alcoholic beverages license. That will be the date set for the commission to consider their license application and if acceptable, approve it. Also want to let you know on internal controls, we have about 60 submitted from Plain Ridge Park Casino with about 40 reviewed and pending approval. Others are in the process of either being reviewed in under variance or other considerations. I wanted to go real quickly just to kind of give the commission a glimpse. I'm pretty sure you're all aware of this, but I wanted to put June in perspective. It's going to be a very busy month for the commission. We'll start off with weekly opening, pre-opening meetings. There'll be 2 licensing events to assist with licensing and make sure we get that completed down at the casino. On June 11th, I mentioned the ABC license. On June 11th, we're also going to have to take a look at the DOR Intercept MOU. On the 22nd, there'll be tests, and then we'll have to do consideration of the operational tests that were there and determine whether or not there's a pre-opening operation certificate. June 24th, of course, is the grand opening. June 25th, we have the operations certificate final approval, and we still may have to try to fit in an exclusion list there before we get out at the end of the month of June. What I'd like to do is pause just a minute to go back yesterday as well. We talked about these licensing events quite a bit. And yesterday, your licensing division and the Massachusetts State Police team, along with Plain Ridge Park Casino staff, completed our second licensing day at PPC. I might add that the preparation is oftentimes an issue for those. Now to about 105 applicants, only one wasn't ready with their forms as they came in. So it gives you a little bit idea of the background of the work that was done. I've also heard from our team that the process went smoothly.
Did you say only one had their forms, or only one did not?
Did not have their
Oh,
forms.
wow.
Right. Our MGC team processed about 105 applications on the 27th. They already processed 60 on the 15th. So it's about 165 applications in 2 days. And so at this point, what I'd like to be able to do is refer to Karen Wells, because I believe she has a new member of her team she would like to introduce to the commission. And as well, I know he will have some additional detail to share with you.
Great.
Great.
Good afternoon. I am extremely pleased to introduce Paul Connolly as the new Director of Licensing at the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. He just started last week and has already hit the ground running. Paul does come to us with a wealth of both public and private sector experience, specializing in systems and protocol development. So he's been an extremely good match for us, and things are going extremely well since he started. Most recently, Paul was the Vice President of Global Solutions at XFact Incorporated, a public sector management firm. And then prior to that, he served as the Assistant Secretary for Homeland Security at the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security, and also was a director at the Commonwealth Fusion Center. So I'm very happy that he's on board. The staff is very happy. He's been working very well with the entire team, and I think he's coming in at a critical juncture, and he definitely has the enthusiasm and the positive attitude to get things going. And so we're very pleased to welcome him here this afternoon.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Karen.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
So I think he, was going to just he's just getting up to speed now. But I think he's got some information, just give you some highlights on what he's seeing as he is taking over the division.
Exactly, and I'd like to just take the opportunity to elaborate on some of the comments that Director Day had made as well. And first, I want to start with it's been wonderful, and I want to say that any successes I've had so far are completely the result of the great staff and tremendous colleagues who have been helping me along the way. So I just wanted to note that at the outset. It's been a very busy but easy transition into this position because of that.
It's good to have you.
Thank you. On the vendor side, so as I look at the applications, there's really, the two sides, is being the new guy in, how I, split it. But on the vendor side, I just wanted to give a highlight as it pertains to Plain Ridge, some of the applications that are coming in. We have a total of over 600 applications that have come in, 366 non-gaming vendors, 16 primary vendors, 15 of whom have been identified by Plain Ridge as vendors that they're going to utilize. 9 secondary or gaming vendor secondary level, 145 gaming vendor employees, and what that is primarily slot technicians and people who do a lot of the technical aspect of the business during the operations, and 69 subcontractors, being those that are subcontracting primarily around getting the actual physical infrastructure both planned for and up and ready. So again, a lot of work, a tremendous amount that have come in, but also we're working through those applications at a very good pace. To speak again directly to what Director Day had mentioned, the licensing event yesterday went quite well. I want to note that Plain Ridge did indeed really have their employees well prepared and have we had a very good system up and running, and the state police did an incredible job getting people fingerprinted, which is not always an easy duty, which I can attest to when I was giving my prints as part of the pre-employment process. It can take a while, despite everyone's best efforts. Plainridge has indicated that they're going to hire about 501 employees. We have so far, as of the close of business yesterday, received 302 license applications and registration applications. So that means we have 199 approximately remaining. We have been working through those applications to get to that 302 level, both in steady state as applications come in, as well as through these two licensing events, which have been, again, highly collaborative events between Plainridge, the licensing division, and the state police. We covered 53 on the 15th, and just yesterday, again, over 100 applicants came through. Very seamless process. Everyone was well prepared. And again, I want to highlight that and reiterate that because it is the reflection of a lot of planning and work ahead of time to make it happen. We have two more events scheduled, one on June 5th and one on June 12th. We have every expectation that they'll go just as smoothly, and as a matter of fact, as the numbers reflect from the previous two, we intend to bring in more than 100, somewhere perhaps up to 150 if indeed we can manage that flow. So we're making very good headway, being very mindful that we want to get everything, do our part to get everything up and running in advance of the opening on the 24th.
As I understand it, a lot of the, I got shared some interesting information from our partners at the community college yesterday, since most of the trainees are probably going to be on the food and beverage side of the house. I think it's Bristol Community College is taking the lead with doing a lot of the TIPS training. 7 to 10 sessions of TIPS training they're going to offer in the month of June to support Penn National to hopefully train about 250 to 300 of the employees. So
that's great.
It's a good number.
As just a commentary, being out there for the event yesterday, I was saying it was very nice to see the enthusiasm and the receptiveness of the employees to enter into this process. It was a nice event from a number of sides, not the least of which was doing the work, but also getting to meet the people who will be able to take advantage of the opportunity.
It's great.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So the people get hired, and then the Bristol Community College does the training of the people who actually are going to do the job.
I think Bristol is offering, excuse me, I think Bristol is offering the TIPS training, the sessions to one, accommodate maybe Penn National's needs, but also other businesses within the region. So it may not all be specifically for Penn.
That's great.
But
that's great.
They've tried to have a more regional collaborative approach with other restaurants, hotels, everybody else in the region that needs the workforce.
Great.
I know that the intake is critical, the process, the flow. I know that only leads to additional work, obviously, by IEB as far as background investigations. Director Wells, what do you anticipate having to complete before opening in order to make sure every employee is credentialed?
Right, so all the employees that are of the key levels and GEL levels need to be licensed. So they have to have either a temporary license or a permanent license. They will have either of those. Gaming service employees, they just need their application completed and they can get to work, and then we would be doing those backgrounds. So we'll be prioritizing the keys and the GELs and then working on the service employees as we go through that.
Do you have, and forgive me if you already mentioned this on your remarks, but do you have a sense of how many more keys and GELs?
Yeah, the way we've structured it with Plainridge, that the keys and the GELs are on the front end. So most of these that are coming in and at the back end are the gaming service employees. Right. So that actually works very well with our process.
And those are the ones that once they submit their application and it's complete, they can start.
Correct.
And we can,
Right.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you
Really
both.
good.
Thank
yeah,
you.
it's really good to have you.
Welcome.
Yeah.
And it's apparent you've jumped right in, learned the issues, paid attention to the workflow and the people. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
His second day on the job, we had him out talking to a group of chambers of commerce around vendor requirements. We let him handle all the questions, and he did a great job.
Something we learned there.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Is there any-
Mr. Chair, if I could get Nancy Stack to join us up front.
Sure.
While Nancy's coming forward, I'd like to refer you to your packet. You should be in tab 3E. Under that particular tab, you should have a memorandum from me pertaining to potential RFA2 revisions, spreadsheets including comparisons of previous questions and proposed revisions. Also something that's identified as an errata sheet, which is actually a couple questions that we missed, and so we put that in so we make sure that it was all part of your motion as you talk today, and a series of templates. I want to stress that all this has really been put together by Nancy Stack from Pink & Company. As you move forward here, let me briefly address the documents. Those documents include Commissioner's proposed revisions to RFA2 and for questions in all 5 categories. That doesn't mean that there's changes to all of the questions in the packet, but there have been changes in all 5 of the categories. The spreadsheet captures the original text of the questions alongside the proposed revised text. The revisions are based on experience during casino evaluations for Region A and B and modifications made to the questions after the slot parlor evaluations. The goal in this process was to streamline the review process. In general, each commissioner worked with his or her advisors to identify questions where there had been difficulties in interpreting information provided by the applicants, where one or more requests for clarification was required, where regulations have now been adopted by MGC, and where there seemed to be unnecessary repetition. As with the previous revisions, the templates were developed or updated to standardize the information that comes in from the evaluation. Some of the more substantial revisions, or proposed revisions, I should say, are in Category 1 in the overall questions, where they minimize the repetition and overlap by reducing from 9 questions to 4. And for responsible gaming questions in Category 5, mitigation, questions were updated to bring them into conformance with the regulations and the responsible gaming framework and related regulations, resulting in the reduction of questions from 10 to 6. After the Commissioner's review today, if you approve the revisions, we may need to complete non-material edits to prepare the revisions for the applicants. Copies of new templates are also attached, and we may need to make sure that those templates match the questions that were in business or were approved here today. Finally, the revisions will be discussed with the applicants themselves when they come into MGC for a meeting to review the mechanics of the RFA2 application process, which is the same process that was followed by the slots, Region A and Region B. I did mention that the 2 questions were omitted and are documented on that errata sheet that you'll see in there, and that's question 419, quality of amenities, and 424 of the existing, a question about the existing transportation infrastructure. And those should be considered part of the revisions for today's discussion. In the end, we're hopeful that as way of a recommendation that the Commission will approve the drafts, allow further clarification with individual commissioners for us to make sure we haven't missed a question or misaligned it, and then allow us to complete non-material edits so we can prepare these questions for the applicants. With that, it's up to the Commission from there.
Okay.
Nancy, do you want to add anything before we start to that? You were sort of the coordinator of this process, and this display, I must say, is very easy to follow. It really helps us focus in on the changes without any irrelevancies.
Other than just to acknowledge all the work that a lot of other people did, including each commissioner and their advisors. Stan Elkerton is here, who worked closely with putting together the materials for the building and site design team. So if there's any questions, particularly in that area, he can look things up. And this is really just a work in progress to try and make it simpler for your reviews, but we're available to make any tweaks or clarify anything before we finalize. I think there are a number of these changes that will facilitate the review as we go forward. Although I'm reminded, as Commissioner Zuniga reminded me, that it doesn't mean we won't have any requests for clarification. That we do recognize that even as we update our templates based on the experiences we've had, that everybody prepares information slightly differently, and that there may still be a need to make sure that we're interpreting the information they submit correctly.
Okay. Questions, thoughts?
No, I should acknowledge Stan Elkerton is here, and he was been the scribe and the driving force for a number of these changes, and performed as usual in admirable fashion in that regard. So,
Absolutely.
I thought the process was very smooth. We just really focused on issues that we had learned in the past, that the answers were, the questions were, hard to understand, and the answers were not in a format where we could judge apples to apples between applicants. So I thank you for the work. It was smooth, it's well done, well prepared, and I think adds the clarity that we were looking for.
I personally, I think the process helped. As I was going back through my questions, what I appreciated in the input of our team appreciated is that we are erasing some of the duplicity in our answers. Some of our questions are so closely aligned that there was a lot of cut and paste material, and let's not go through that exercise if we don't have to, or have our applicant do that. But as I was going back through these again last night, it's a small provision, and I got to ask my colleague Commissioner Cameron about it, because we had under question 3.9 on HR practices, information associated with gaming employees being taught to identify or intervene with customers exhibiting a problem gaming behavior. And I would feel that in the realignment of some of your questions on responsible gaming, that's probably something that we can take out from our question if you have it covered.
Let me just reread that, Commissioner. You're at 3.39?
3.9.
I'm looking.
Page 4.
Yeah, I have it.
And it's the last box before question 310. It talks about the employee assistance programs, and then we had some language in there at the end talking about training their gaming employees to identify and intervene with customers with gaming behavior.
May I suggest something? Because I had a similar thought, but this was sort of maybe cut across more than one example, like the one you just mentioned. And it also hit me when I read the packet and saw the detail of the other sections, not the one that I was familiar with, which was the finance one. And there are a number of questions where there is similar information. For example, the cost of infrastructure is relevant in finance as well as building and site design. And we always knew that, and that was also part of the process. And just like the one you just mentioned, there's a HR element in the workforce on that one question, but there's also a mitigation element. And I wonder if it would be helpful for those two or any others like that to simply do what you've done in other questions, which is make a reference. That, if you're answering this question, we still want it here, but there's a tie, if you will, or there's a reference to another section elsewhere in the application, because we know that there's a bit of a overlap, and maybe we could leave it rather than trying to resolve any one of those either here or by ourselves.
I can defer to Catherine on this a little bit, but I know that when the meetings were held with the other applicants, when they were required to be walked through, if you will, the mechanics of the RFA2, where we got down to the details of how to mark an attachment confidential and things like that, we did talk a little bit about what I understood to be a fairly intentional overlap amongst the different categories, and encouraged people to repeat things if necessary, from one to the other. But I like your idea of perhaps a cross-reference that could simply be, see also questions X, Y, Z in mitigation related to responsible gaming, or make more explicit that cross-reference on a lot of the cost info in finance. We've handled it in reviews by simply getting reviewers together to compare as necessary. And actually, in this revision, we had a really effective, I think, joint meeting between the mitigation and the building and design team, because there was so much overlap on the traffic impacts and traffic mitigation. So I think that was a very useful kind of thing. But I think an explicit cross-reference would be fine, just to sort of help people make sure that it's not only answered there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. To answer your question, Commissioner, you're correct in that the historical efforts, it's question 5.33, historical efforts against problem gambling. The applicants in the past have described their training methods with employees and how to identify and what to do once they do identify. So I'm sure there is, we have it, we don't have it specifically covered, but many of the applicants do in fact speak to the training in their answer here. I don't know that it's necessary to delete yours, though. I think you're, just the cross-reference would be appropriate.
Anything else? Do we need to vote to adopt these as subsequently edited? Yeah. Somebody want to, Commissioner Stebbins?
Mr. Chair, I move that the Commission adopt substantively the changes as provided in the packet to the RFA2 application, subject to some smaller edits and changes as directed between individual commissioners and staff.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
That's easy.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Great job.
Are you guys all okay to just finish off? We are on item number 4. Welcome back.
Yes, I'm back. The first item on the agenda under the IUB is the Gaming Agents Training Plan. I'm going to turn that over to Assistant Director Ban. But before I do that, I just want to really publicly acknowledge the tremendous job he did in putting that training together. He really exceeded all expectations, and he's really developed an excellent team, not only in the trainers, but also in the hiring that he's done. He and Bert Kane worked extremely hard putting this together, and it's been very well received. It's extremely thorough, extremely comprehensive, and I could not be more grateful for the work that he's done on this project.
Well, thanks, Karen. You kind of stole my thunder.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners.
Can I mention something just
Sure.
on that note? I was able to attend one of the internal controls meeting training sessions, and I had that impression as well. And in addition, a lot of that is being recorded, so I now look forward to the sessions that I've missed, because I have not been able to attend to many of them.
Oh my God. Commissioner.
Just one other footnote. It seems to me that it's been a lot of fun, too. It seems to me that you've picked a group that's bonded well together, and they are going to operate as a team down there. And it's great to see this. It's the esprit and the fun. It seems to me.
I'd like to speak to that as well. Content is one thing. Looking at a lesson plan and saying, wow, this looks like great training, but actually my office is right outside where the training is, and on breaks, the enthusiasm, the interest that these both the troopers, the local police, the ABCC, and the gaming agents will talk about what they just learned and really are excited about starting their jobs and feel like they're getting the best training they can in order to be prepared. So that's equally as important as what it says in the lesson plan. So the delivery is also superb, and I thank you as well.
Great, thanks.
I just want to add, it's been interesting during those breaks to just introduce myself to some members of the team and just kind of get their various backgrounds and what they studied, what they've been doing prior to applying for this position. It's it's a good, well-rounded group of people. I did sit in on a session too, and because I'm a non-mathematician, I probably shouldn't have picked random number generators session. But you know, everybody else was attentive to the topic.
Okay, source
Not
code
me,
might have been
but
the better
everybody else
choice for you there. This being the first gaming agent class, we have like about 34 agents and police and involved in it. The makeup is from, of course, our IEB gaming agents, state police, some input from the Attorney General's office, Plainville Police, and ABCC agents. I couldn't have asked for a better group and for people to have melded together that well. As any new situation kind of starts, it's a little tense to begin with. Everybody seems to be best friends now, and that's really important when you have a group of investigators to be willing to share information, help everybody along in the process. So I couldn't be more pleased. The training itself, it was pretty intense, and Burke and I specifically designed it that way. Some of the areas might actually be over some of the you know, their heads or the level that they're capable of going to, but it was important to expose them to anything. Like I mentioned source code. I don't think I necessarily have future programmers in there, but they understand what source code does in a slot machine and how it affects the outcome of the game. So we covered things. We had gaming case presentations from Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods, so actual cases that they're currently working on to expose everybody to know what they're going to come in conflict with. Attorney General's office gave presentations on 23K and 271 crimes, money laundering, drugs, human trafficking, asset forfeiture, and enterprise crime relating to gaming establishment. We did some report writing. We had 4 intense days of internal control training. I don't know if they'll ever forgive me for that, but yeah, they've had it. They had 4 in-depth days on slot machines, and I say in-depth. I've done this in other jurisdictions, and in these other jurisdictions, I was not exposed to this depth of training. I think it was excellent for the staff. We did a self-exclusion, responsible gaming sections, had a session on active shooter scenarios. We did, let me see, on the end of this, we today and tomorrow are actually out at Plain Ridge going through the facility. Next week we do basic table games and 2 days of games protection, and finishing up with some surveillance training out at Plain Ridge. And I think they'll be ready. Training will be ongoing as they work.
That really sounds like a robust lineup, and although they're not going to be dealing with all those things, as you say, source code, it's really important to have that kind of overview to put things into perspective. So,
Yes, I think
yeah,
so.
it's great.
Thank you.
It's very exciting. I mean, we're ramping up now for the last month before the deployment, and these are all the steps we need to take day by day to get there.
Yes. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
The next item on the agenda is just the update I have that I've been doing every 2 weeks for you on the temporary primary vendor and key gaming employee licenses that have been issued. We've issued 3 key gaming employee licenses: Christine Slick, the slot shift manager at Plainville, Jamie Lee Fromel, the slot shift manager at Plainville, and Roberta Lynn Gregory, the compliance manager at Plainville. And we've also licensed 2 additional primary vendors, Global Cash and Central Credit. As with per our regulations and with the other temporary licenses we've issued, they were deemed complete by the Division of Licensing, and the petitioner, being Penn National, certified, and the IEB found that after reviewing the plan for the facility, that the temporary licenses were necessary for the operation of the gaming establishment given their opening date, and were not designed to circumvent normal licensing procedures. We also found that the licenses for those 3 individuals and 2 companies were reasonably likely to be issued upon completion of the investigation. That's just my update.
Great.
Remind me, how long are the key gaming?
6-month temporaries.
6 months, so it's the same as the vendors?
Right.
Okay.
So I would expect their full license would be issued before that, well before then, so
Okay.
we'll be all set.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we're,
How long do we think this might take?
well, there's only one more section.
I might
and,
pass out. That's okay.
there was some feeling that we ought to just go ahead and get it done.
Get it
so,
done,
yeah.
okay.
All right, we're on our last item, legal division.
You two different sets of regulations. The first five, well, first, I'll do A first. Brief update on the Suffolk Downs racing application. As you probably know, Suffolk Downs did file an application. They requested 3 days of live racing. We have a public hearing on the application scheduled for June 11th in the afternoon. That notice has been posted. The application has been posted too for comments as well. So we are reviewing that, and we will have our public hearing, and then the commission can consider the application formally at the next available commission meeting. So that's where we are in that. We're collecting comments, and we'll make sure all the commissioners have those as well.
Those aren't coming to us piecemeal, I gather, because I've not seen anything. Are you collecting stuff and then we'll get it as a package?
Yes, we're going to
Okay.
collect it all together.
Okay.
So that's A. Under sections B and C, we have a number of regulations. This is the biggest part of the regulations we have to complete to open at Penn. Under section B, these are the regulations that we've already had a hearing on. The hearing was May the 21st. Commissioner McHugh presided over that hearing, and Deputy General Counsel Grossman and Cecilia Porche were there. We did receive some comments on those regulations, and there were some changes that came from those comments. I will talk to you briefly about the hearings regulation, but what we're looking for under item B is to vote to have those finalized so we can file them, and then they will be through the promulgation process. The first regulation, 205 CMR 101 hearings, this was the hearing regulation. This creates the overall hearing process for all of the matters that come up through the hearing officer and then to the commission. There were no comments on this, so we have made no changes to this regulation since you last saw it. So that one is ready to go. And then I'll let Mr. Grossman speak to the balance in item B.
Good afternoon. So we're on 205 CMR 136, which is the sale and distribution of alcoholic beverages. There are a couple of points that I thought we should bring to your attention. The first, as you'll see, is on page 2. It's in red. These are changes made subsequent to the last time you have seen this. We received a number of a public comment, and then we've had discussions with the Plainridge Council about their application that led to this particular recommended change. And there are a number of changes in here that touch on this topic. And that is where exactly one could consume an alcoholic beverage that was lawfully served in a licensed area. And what we do here is we clarify that an alcoholic beverage can be consumed in anywhere on the premises of the gaming establishment, whether in a licensed area or not in a licensed area, subject to any restrictions that are placed on the license by the commission. So for example, in the case of Plainridge, presumably there would be a restriction on one taking an alcoholic beverage into the parking garage. And that would have to be a condition of their alcohol license, even though the parking garage is part of the gaming establishment. So there are some restrictions that will have to be placed on the transportation and consumption of alcoholic beverages, but this will allow a patron to take a drink from a licensed area to either another licensed area or to an area that is not a licensed area and consume it. So that was the major change that was made to these regulations.
Is the commission that places those restrictions this commission or the ABCC?
The entire oversight is subject to a license issued by this commission.
This commission.
The agents of the ABCC do have authority to enforce.
Okay.
So this change that you've described succinctly, in effect, allows the commission to tailor the consumption piece of the license to the actual geographic layout of the facility.
That's correct, and I think it's also consistent with the statute, which talks about alcoholic beverages being drunk on the premises. So it seems to envision that one could drink a drink anywhere on the premises of the gaming establishment. But there certainly are some restrictions that should be placed upon that.
Right.
And I think that's what this does. This also would require the applicant in the first instance to tell us where they think the restrictions should be, but ultimately it'll be incumbent upon Mr. Conley, who will give it the first review, and then the commission ultimately to impose the condition.
Right.
So that was the first issue. The second thing.
Conley, Director of Licensing?
Yes.
Okay.
So that the process here, as Mr. Day touched on a little bit, is that they will, Plainridge will submit an application, and we have a meeting scheduled with them tomorrow to go through their application. Mr. Conley will make any recommendations to them first that he thinks need to be made to tweak the application, to bring it into compliance with the regulations, to ensure public safety and otherwise. And then it'll come to you with a recommendation for approval, or if for some reason the licensee doesn't agree with one of his recommendations, they could come to you for a final decision. So that's on its way. The only other issue I thought I would mention is that this is on page 6. It deals with the insurance provisions. We have received a variance request that's not before you at the moment that pertains to the Penn National insurance policy. And what their petition is, and again, you haven't seen it, so you don't need to rule on it, but you should be aware of it as it relates to this provision. They are saying that, to make a long story short, that their policy does have an aggregate limit on it. The regulation here says that the policy shall have no aggregate limit on it. What they say, though, is that they have an umbrella policy of $4 million, as the case is, that they argue should satisfy the concerns that were intended by this provision. So I think it would be appropriate, certainly, just to make you aware of this provision of the regulation, and the variance requested will be coming your way. I would just note that the state law in Chapter 138 that applies to other alcoholic beverage licensees does not have a provision that says that their policy can't have an aggregate limit. That was something we included. So that's where we are at the moment.
But you changed it to no annual.
No annual. Well, I think that clarifies what an aggregate limit really means. That doesn't really.
Aggregate limit can. Oh, I'm sorry. Can be a
Multi-year.
Could be a per accident.
Lifetime.
Could be a per accident too. Okay. So anyway, we're saying these are the minimums, but if there's 100 accidents, God forbid, they apply to all 100 accidents.
That's right.
Right.
Which is not what the state law is as it applies to other licensees.
Right.
The limits are the same, but the aggregate is just a part of these regulations.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Anything else?
We also added in the wine provision that we discussed last time, but otherwise there's nothing that you haven't either seen or that needs further explanation.
So CMR 151.
150,
150.
right? Just a one page.
Did I miss one?
Right, yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Which one is?
150.
Oh, the underage?
Mhm.
Are there were changes made to that.
Just to where the money goes.
That seems-
identifiable winnings or losses as a result of such prohibited gaming remitted to the Commission for Deposit in the Gaming Revenue Fund.
That seems non-controversial.
Right.
All right, 151.
151 deals with the operation certificate. There are a couple of points to be made here. I would start with a provision that we are going to recommend be added. It's not in here at the moment. And what it would do would be to allow the commission to designate to anyone or a specific commissioner the authority to conditionally approve the issuance of the certificate operation subsequent to the test period being completed, which would also include a review of the floor plan that we talk about here that would allow the licensee to operate prior to a final review being conducted by the commission. So it's really just an interim step before you sign off, and I think it's really a timing issue.
Yeah, so you have one person do it because we can't be meeting around the clock as we draw near.
So it would require you to designate someone to
Right.
do that, but otherwise, if subject to your approval, we would add that actually probably at the end of the first paragraph on the first page.
Okay with me.
If you're interested, there was in discussing, there was a public comment that came in that suggested that we separate non-gaming issues out of this section. As you've observed, this operation certificate combines a review of gaming issues with non-gaming issues, and ultimately rolls it all up into a final issuance of an operation certificate. The alternative would be to separate out gaming issues and say that you need an operation certificate based upon having satisfactory gaming controls in place and your internal controls, and then create a separate section that deals with things like the infrastructure and your amenities and things of that nature. What this does is it just rolls them up together, which I think is a more efficient way to do it, but you did receive a public comment that suggested, I think, essentially that you separate those two functions.
Sounds good to me.
Yep, okay. Next.
Okay, that's all on that one. We are on to 152, which is individuals excluded from a gaming establishment. There was a public comment that raised some civil rights issues with this provision. I can tell you that I reviewed this with an individual that has some background in civil rights issues, and they did make one recommendation, which is on page 2, which just kind of broadens the areas in which you could not exclude someone based upon. But otherwise, the sense was that the statute says what the statute says, and it seems to be constitutional on its face. So there was no reason not to move forward with this provision.
I had a couple questions on this one. First of all, where is the public official exclusion?
So that's at the very end. That's the last provision. It's page 5 at the bottom. It's section 10. That's
Okay.
obviously the other major issue that the commission should address.
And so we've now had public comment, you've received the public comment, you've thought about it, and you think it should stay in? Is that your recommendation?
Not necessarily. I mean, I have a personal opinion on this. It's not a legal opinion.
Go for it.
As has been suggested, I don't necessarily think this is an essential element to include here. I think it could be left to each individual host community to determine whether restrictions should be placed upon their elected officials wagering in a gaming establishment. We were fortunate to get some input from Michael and Carol And they made a couple of good points and one recommendation if the commission is inclined to move forward with this. The first thing to understand was they suggested, and I think this is consistent with my review as well, is that there is no such provision like this anywhere else in any other jurisdiction, exactly on point. There are some tribal rules under the National Indian Gaming Regulatory Act that do either that or individual rules that do restrict some tribal members from gambling at tribal casinos. So it's not necessarily unprecedented altogether. And some jurisdictions, and I don't have them here to cite for you, do place restrictions on elected officials being extended credit or being issued comps. But apparently there are no jurisdictions that prohibit elected officials from wagering altogether. If the commission is inclined to move forward with this provision, it was recommended, and I think this makes good sense, to be more precise with which exactly elected officials we are concerned with. The mayor versus the school committee and things of that nature.
Versus the viewer offenses. Right?
The viewer offenses, the dog catcher, whatever it is. And so that's one way to go about doing this. And the overall concern here, I think, is also important just to think about, and that is, it's really just a perception issue. We don't, I don't think, have any actual concern with elected officials wagering. It's just the perception that would come along perhaps with the mayor or some selectman or something hitting a jackpot in a casino, and what the general public may think about that, and whether there was, you know, some type of collusion or something of that nature. I suppose that is the concern. So when you weigh it all together, I mean, my personal opinion is that it could be very well just left to each host community to determine how to go about doing it.
The other piece, though, that Michael and Carol pointed out, which makes us different than other jurisdictions, are those host community agreements. So those public officials do, in fact, have agreements with the gaming operator. So there is more to this than just there happens to be a casino in my town. So that was a point they thought, led some credence to excluding. And I think certainly the comps and the credit makes perfect sense. And certainly not excluding them from coming in, going to the restaurants or all of the other amenities. It really is just the gaming piece that could be a perception issue. I really do think it is an issue if the mayor wins a jackpot, you know?
I hear that, and I think it may be an issue. I also think, however, that the cities and towns who are the host communities are perfectly capable of taking care of this themselves. We've already seen one host community enact an ordinance that prohibits employment in a casino for a certain time after you leave office. And to the extent that this is a concern in a particular host community, it seems to me that the host community can have a prohibition, the host community can have a disclosure requirement, the host community can let it go. This statute places a lot of control over operations and other things in the host community, and it seems to me that this is an area that they can deal with as well, and probably are better to deal with, because they understand a lot more, they're a lot closer to the ground, I guess, and a one-size-fits-all prohibition may not really be the thing that's necessary in order to prevent the stigmas from rising. So I'd be inclined not to put it in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do, from the comments, and having thought a lot about this, and I personally have evolved from my initial position of restriction. And perhaps the most critical piece really is extension of credit and comps. If we simply It's not simple, but if we had a regulation against that on the casino, because we have the ability to regulate the casino, and the extension of comps, and with it, free play, for example, that we have left up to the devices of the at the discretion of the operator, to limit that to non-public officials, that may suffice for all of that perception concerns. We'd have to think a little bit more about who qualifies, because many of these, just to your other point, many of these, a public official could be, could be very different between a city and a town, for example, and that, many of them volunteers in the case of towns, etc., and that opens the door to a lot of other things. But if we were going to go restricting, I would say the piece that might be the most critical is comps, credit, and free play, and we could impose that on the casino.
Commissioner?
I've thought a lot about this issue too, having been a former elected official, local elected official. And it is tough, I think, for us to find a one-size-fits-all, because we have communities with different forms of governance. Plainville is a town, you have an elected planning board, Springfield has an appointed planning board. All officials who may or may not have some role in impacting the relationship between a licensee and the community kind of going forward. I looked at this as more, this kind of follows in line with state ethics guidelines that local municipal officials have to follow just like we do, and saw this more as again, as we're just getting gaming up off the ground in Massachusetts, more of just a protective measure. This isn't maligning anybody, it's not maligning our licensees, it's not maligning any local elected officials. It's just help us, help you, help our licensee avoid any headaches that could come from a local official who goes in, plays slots, and wins a nice jackpot while their neighbor is sitting 2 machines away who's not experiencing the same luck. And it's going to take on a whole different feel when we have table games, when our larger licensees come on board. So trying to come up with something that would, I was trying to wrestle with how something is all-inclusive. I thought about, the officials that you talked about, people that may not have a direct role in a municipality's relationship with a licensee. But I know from being a local official, as a school committee member, and a school committee member in any of these towns wouldn't have a direct relationship in their formal role with a licensee. However, I'm sure most school committee members will be happy to see a little bit of an impact on their school budget by the virtual presence of a licensee and community payments that they're making. And as a local elected official, you get asked questions all the time, whether they're related to your department or not. We know in 5 years, when Plainville comes back, hopefully to have their license extended, we're going to have a lot of feedback and thoughts from people in the community, and including elected officials, I would suspect. Again, I'm in favor of keeping this in there is kind of just a preventative and a protective measure for all of us involved, our licensees, this commission, local elected officials. As Commissioner McHugh said, it's nice to see some communities have taken their own initiative to put some thoughtful ordinances in place about the relationship between a licensee and the community. I read all the comments, but at this juncture, I kind of lean in favor of keeping the provision in there.
Keeping it as is?
Keeping it as is.
Mm-hmm.
As is?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, So the elected librarians can't, you're saying, what you would say?
I would
Okay.
include it just as it is.
Okay. I've gone back and forth on this too, and I think I've ended up thinking that this was, the only thing that I think I can feel sort of okay about would be maybe if we had a statute that said to the licensees that they may not give comps, free play or whatever, to town officials, maybe a narrow definition of town officials, beyond the ordinary course of events. So we do have a piece of paper that says, hey, you can't go to your town and the year before the renewal's coming up and start giving them out a whole bunch of stuff. Some sort of catch-all thing like that, which is already probably covered by extortion and bribery laws anyway. But that would be sort of a very mild figment. Figment? No, fig leaf. But the rest of it, you know, I do sort of sympathize. Although we didn't get a lot of outpouring of objections, so you know, but I do sort of sympathize for folks. This is just an everyday run-of-the-mill fun kind of thing to do, and it's tough enough to be an elected official. Virtually none of these folks are paid, few of them, and it does do again to public servants what we often do, which is kind of operate with a presumption of guilt, you know, or a suspicion of guilt. So taken all together, unless it were that very mild kind of prohibition against extraordinary goods and services to elected officials, I would be disinclined to do it too.
Would you be disinclined to do what I was suggesting, place a restriction on comps, credit and free play? Any one of those, or all three?
In the absolute, yeah. I mean, it does. I mean, if a person wants, if an elected official wants to get credit, you know, because they are a pretty big player, like to play, it seems so. Yeah, I would not.
What about free play? Because you know, maybe free play is, you know.
If they have a player card and they play at a level that would qualify them for free play, just like everybody else at that level, I wouldn't have a problem with them getting that free play. That's why I say, you know, you can't go beyond that. That clearly would be an issue. But
the state ethics laws deal with reporting and other kinds of requirements for that
Gifts.
kind of stuff, right?
Yes, they do.
I mean, the form you have to file at the end of the year, you have to, I would think you probably have to put a lot of that stuff in there. Then surely if the comps of the free play are given in the expectation that you're going to act favorably, then that's a prohibition and treated seriously.
It can't be more than $50 in value.
Not more than $50 in value under any circumstances, right? So it seems to me that if we're going to do that, we really ought to do the sort of prohibition on particular kinds of comps and gifts. We really need to think that through and look at where the state ethics laws already breach, or make a decision that we're going to do something independent. I'm saying that I don't think we ought to do that today.
Okay.
Without asking
if
staff
we were
to
going
research.
if we were going to do something, we should. But if you'd be okay with doing nothing today? If we
No,
decided
I
not
would like to take, because this regulation, we're voting on putting it into effect. I'd like to take 152.10 out. That's where I'm going to go, and then think about if we need to. Is there something along these lines that we ought to put in, and if so, we can do it on an emergency basis and put it out for comment. And if we're convinced that it's the wrong thing to do, we can take it out right away. It won't last very long.
Right. Okay.
This, as well as the exclusion list, or this whole set of rules is about an exclusion list, and those on that exclusion list are not that great of individuals. That's why it got them on there in the first place. So it is a little bit odd for us to have this section about public officials here as well. And I know as I listen to the discussion that the whole concept of enforcement is the other side of the equation, which if the licensee would allow someone to play, and we're having a lot of discussion about who's actually the elected official, it could be real problematic to actually effectively enforce it in the first place anyway, so.
Well,
If I might, Enrique, just.
Please.
The Commissioner Zuliga, if
Enrique's fine.
the whole suggestion about impact and possibly the comps or the rewards programs and those kind of things, we're most likely need to come back and look at those programs again and any restrictions we might put in them, again, before we open up the larger casinos. And that may be an opportunity to actually refocus on that and make sure that we've got the right kind of policy that the commission might want.
Right. Well, you stole the thunder. That's exactly what I was gonna say. You know, I would go along, perhaps with the majority here and strike that at this point, and come back and revise it and place it. If there is such a way in which we can place either a limited or somewhere else, when it comes to credit or defining what is outside of the normal normal course of their own procedures, and place it somewhere else.
Yeah, I would be interested in looking at comps, credit, free play. I really would. I think that's, and I understand that we should take our time and not to rush to that, though, really look at it and see what else impacts that. But I think that that's worth us looking at, and
So we've agreed that this one's out.
For the time being, this one's out.
I had a couple.
Well, we might want to take a vote on that.
I'm not in an agreement on that.
Right.
So if you would vote on the removal of 152.10?
We're gonna vote
And then we're gonna
overall.
vote overall on these
Right.
and the amended small business impact statements that go with them to proceed to final promulgation.
Okay, so let me make a motion then, as in anticipation of the final motion, that 152.10 be removed from the draft regulation 205 CMR 152. Period.
Yep, I second that.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay.
4-1. I had a couple other quick questions on this, and I was really getting late for lunch, but is there any issue about having when the commission is considering whether someone should go on the list, particularly somebody who is an associate of an individual who falls into one of these categories, this seems to me like a kind of a tough conversation to have in a public meeting. I mean, you may decide, you talk about the guy, you talk about who he knows, what he's done, maybe you decide not to put him on the exclusion list. Is there any flexibility, or is there any point about whether that would be a conversation that we should or should not have in public? Is there any flexibility? Is that an issue? Could it be done in executive session, for example, or is it done at some other level?
I don't think it's our responsibility to vote on every person, right? That's
Well, I
not
think you do have to vote to put everyone on the list.
every single person.
That's
There
what
has
it
to be
says
an
at the
individual
moment.
vote.
Because they're entitled to process.
You're right,
Yes. Right.
but I didn't know if it was like other things or it could be appealed, but that's the way that reads. Where are we reading? Which one?
Page 2, I think, 2.
So, yeah, it's at the bottom of page 2.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I suppose the answer would begin with, I'd have to look at the executive session statute to answer that part of the question. As far as the report is concerned, there may be pieces of personal information in there that we may want to redact if it were to come public, and the commission may be sensitive to that and not discuss it. But it seems as though this was anticipated by the legislature to be discussed publicly. And in fact,
So that's in the statute?
well, it doesn't, it does say that people are, a vote of the commission,
Okay.
which would be in public.
All right, well,
If you look at the way other states do it,
vote of the commission would not have to be in public, would it?
well, generally,
Oh,
But it
generally, I mean, generally it is. If, for example, there were an investigation that was done on someone who was going to go onto this list, I mean, some discussion of the investigation may be eligible for executive session. The vote itself would be in public. You you may not have the discussion,
Might
but the
have a
vote would be in
discussion. Okay.
public, yes.
I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill. If this doesn't trouble anybody else, you know, I'm happy to.
Well, I must say, I didn't read it carefully, and it does trouble me. It's a little late in the game. I wouldn't mind enacting this now, but I don't see why we couldn't have a process under which these are involuntary exclusions. These are bad guy exclusions. Why we couldn't have a proceeding in the IEB level with a hearing by the hearing officer in the ordinary course, the way we do other things, with the right of appeal to the commission if the excluded person wants to do it. And I apologize, I just didn't read this carefully enough. I thought this provided a hearing, that last sentence would do that.
I thought it did as well.
And maybe it does. If it does, then that's fine, and that's why I say I don't have any problem approving this today. But I would like to revisit that to see if this is broad enough to encompass that process, and if it doesn't clearly embrace that process, then amend this regulation to make that kind of a provision.
I think we could think about handling this the way that we handle suitability determinations, where there is a report to the commission, and obviously personal information or appropriate information is redacted where required. And in the suitability context, there is no right of review, but under this regulation, perhaps we could say that it comes to the commission votes. If you vote to exclude, then there is our hearing process that can then go forward. I mean, that might be one way to think about it.
But the point that Steve made is the one that concerns me. You take all the personal information out, all the social security numbers, everything else. You bring up Joe Jones. Joe Jones is a real bad guy, and so we talk about Joe Jones being a good guy or a bad guy or a real bad guy, and then we say, well, he's not bad enough to exclude. But, you know, Joe Jones has been trashed in the meantime. A lot of those cases, not a lot, some of those cases will never get to us if we have a preliminary hearing, where the hearing examiner comes down and says no.
The process, just to be clear, is set up so that the IEB essentially conducts an investigation, and they make the threshold determination. So there's no hearing per se. In fact, the commission doesn't have to conduct a hearing before excluding someone. You don't have to notify the person. You don't have to provide them any process whatsoever before the decision is made. It's not until after the decision is made that the person is entitled to process and an appeal.
Todd, excuse me, just in the interest of time, can we just agree with what Commissioner McHugh said, that we'll vote it in, let the staff think about, you know, hear what the issues are. Is there a way we can accommodate these issues within the statute as the reg as it stands? If not, then we'll consider an amended, rather than talking further about
I think
it
we
now.
can do that, yes.
And I think that's the way to go, because I would not like to wing it with this one either. And I'm content to have this go into effect preliminarily, and I regret that I didn't read it more carefully to talk to you beforehand. But I should have.
So that's it for the regs. Can we just lump all the SBISs together, or is there anything that you need to draw our attention to?
For the first group under B, you can vote on all 5 of those together, as well as their amended small business impact statements. And then the vote is to move them through the final promulgation process. We have a little different situation under the C, but that won't take too long.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I move that the commission begin the final promulgation process for regulations in the amended SBIS for 205 CMR 101, 136, 150, 151, and 152.
No, those are, would you accept an amendment to say adopt those? Those have been through the final promulgation. They've been through the process. This is a vote to adopt them now. So would you accept an amendment to that motion to
Yeah,
move it?
I'm sorry.
That the commission
I thought it
adopt.
was a final
Adopt them,
promulgation
yes.
process, final adoption process, yes.
Second.
Just one question is, Attorney Grossman identified an addition in the operations. They had the conditional authority.
Yes,
So it's,
language too, as
it would be
discussed here.
subject to the changes that were discussed, yes.
Yes.
Any further discussion? You look like you're thinking.
No.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
And
All
then, under section C, these are the regulations that you have previously approved to be filed on an emergency basis. This was the change to the variance section, and then the addition on the training employees to be able to come in to assist in training. What we're asking here is for you to allow us to start the promulgation process by voting to approve the small business impact statements.
Do we have a motion, Commissioner Stebbins?
Sure, Mr. Chair. I move that the commission approve the amended small business impact statements for emergency regulations 205 CMR 102 and 205 CMR 134.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
The
I
ayes
mean,
have it.
No, no. This is
Yeah,
really
we have
an indication.
4 yes, 1
Time to-
confused.
So I voted yes.
We have 5 yes.
Right.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
In favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Yeah.
And was there any business?
No, I just want to ask you to second the motion to adjourn if you would, and then
Yep.
vote.
I second that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you.